All right, good morning. Good morning. It is my privilege to welcome you again this morning to our next slate of talks. So as I welcome you in, why don't I pray to open our time? So I'll say a couple things and then we'll sing and get going. Father, thank you for this morning. Thank you for the immense privilege that we have to gather together. We pray that you would bless us as we meditate on our calling to represent you in the public square. We pray that you would equip us to speak boldly and courageously as our fathers and mothers in times past have done, and as many of our brothers and sisters in other parts of the globe are doing. We pray that we would speak boldly of Christ and not be ashamed of the gospel, for it's the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes. Thank you for this morning, and pray your blessing on our time in Jesus' name. Amen. I told you that Pentecost weekend is this weekend, and one of the things that tends to trip up and mislead Christians is a tendency to pit the Spirit of God against the law of God. But Scripture doesn't pit the Spirit of God against God's law. In fact, in Ezekiel, when Ezekiel was anticipating the pouring out of the Spirit upon the people of God, Ezekiel speaks as follows. He says, "Then I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you shall be clean. I will cleanse you from all your filthiness and from all your idols. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. I will take the heart of stone out of your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes, and you will keep my judgments and do them." That the gift of the Spirit was to enable us to keep the commandments of God. And so in Romans chapter 8, Paul writes that what the law couldn't do, in that it was weak through the flesh, right? The fault in the law isn't in the law per se. It is in our hearts and in our inability to keep the law, in our hatred of God's law. What the Spirit does is transform our hearts so that we love God's law, we love God's ways, and we want to practice them in our lives. So Paul writes, what the law could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh, God did by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh on account of sin. He condemned sin in the flesh, that the righteous, in order that the righteous requirement of the law might be fulfilled in us, who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. Right? When Jesus pours out the Spirit upon us, he enables us to keep the righteous requirements of the law, because we do so from a heart that wants to honor God and not merely be moralists. Right? The Spirit has been poured out not to eradicate God's moral law, but to enable us to walk in it. Spirit moves us to cry out with David, "Oh, how I love your law. It is my meditation day and night." Psalm 119:97. Spirit comes to set us free, to enable us to run in the way of God's commandments and escape the bondage of our sinful nature. And thanks be to God for that. So you did a good job of buying up all the God and government books back there. Another book that's back there that I read in this last year was Doug Wilson's book on cannabis. In the last year, actually last 6 months, I've counseled two separate couples in which the husband, tragically, was abusing marijuana. It's never been an issue that I've had to face as a pastor until this year. It is going to become an increasingly important issue, particularly in our neck of the woods, because we're right next door to Washington. Would encourage you, if you wrestled with that issue and thought, oh, isn't marijuana similar to alcohol and shouldn't we regulate it in the same way, to pick up Doug's book and be encouraged to think through that issue. It is an issue on which Doug himself changed his position over the years. I always thought his previous position was crazy. So I was grateful for his book and his arguments about that. So I'd encourage you to pick that up. And the reason that we love God's law is because we worship God's exalted King, our Lord Jesus Christ. And so before I introduce our next speaker and make a couple announcements, I want us to sing this morning. I'll invite Aaron up here. We're going to sing Psalm 110. So go ahead and stand. This is number 207. Number 207 in your Cantus Christi. And again, I'm going to have Aaron play through it once for us so you can hear the tune, and then encourage those of you who know it to sing out so that those who don't can pick it up. Jehovah to my Lord has said, sit thou at my right hand, until I make thy foes a stool whereon thy feet may stand. Jehovah shall from Zion send the scepter of thy power, in battle with thine enemies.
Like morning dew shall be. Jehovah's far and from his own, he never will depart. Of the order of Melchizedek, a priest however far. The Lord at thy right hand shall strike his rulers in his wrath. Among the nations he shall cut, the slain shall fill his path. In many lands he'll overthrow their kings with ruin drown. And bars he will take from the brook, and so will thou his head. Amen. You may be seated. All right, so a couple announcements. One, just I've noticed a number of you feasting over there, so please feel free to do that throughout our time this morning. We'll have a couple breaks, and you're welcome to get food and drinks over there. For those of you who are members of Trinity, if at the end of this whole event you're able to stick around and help us set up some for the Pentecost Ball this evening at 5 p.m., would love for you to help us out. We just need to stack some chairs around and things like that, particularly in that it doesn't look like we'll be outside. And then
all the announcements that I had this morning. So both of our new speakers today have history with the Alliance Defending Freedom. Defending Freedom has been doing yeoman's work in defending our freedoms as Americans, and particularly as Christians in the public square. We're very thankful for their work, thankful for these men who are serving in that arena. We really need good attorneys at this time in history. And so Jeffrey Shafer is the director of Hale Institute at New St. Andrews College. He graduated with honors from the Regent University School of Law in 1995. From 2005 to 2020, he served as senior counsel with Alliance Defending Freedom at its Washington, D.C. and Scottsdale, Arizona offices. Mr. Shafer has litigated public interest cases in federal and state trial and appellate courts throughout the United States, as well as developing academic and advocacy initiatives on matters of policy concern. Outside of the courtroom, he's addressed a wide array of audiences in academic and community venues, including ours today, in the U.S. and abroad on matters of legal and cultural interest. So please welcome Jeffrey with me.
Thank you for that introduction, Pastor. Good morning to you. Very nice to see you. I don't have a PowerPoint this morning, which I understand these days is a faux pas of sorts, right? So those of you who are now doomed to go to sleep, my apologies. For the rest of you, hopefully my mere presentation orally will be sufficient. Thank you, Blaine, for the invitation. I wasn't quite sure in the broad context of religious liberty what I ought to talk about. There's a great deal that can be said, and as a result, what I say today will only be a small fragment of what could have been said. But I was gratified in some respect that what Jared Longshore presented yesterday, it serves as something of a segue or an introduction into a number of the components of my presentation this morning. Here I go, leaving my notes. We're in the middle of this shameful thing called Pride Month right now. Pastor Longshore yesterday was speaking about the presence of an alternative religion in our society. This is one that is doing so, but in a very disgraceful way. But it's interesting in that it conceives of itself as properly grabbing the public calendar, the public spaces, public law, showing us a number of things about how a religion that believes in itself acts. And I think there are some hard lessons for us as we see the pietistic and private orientation of Christian religion is being shown a thing or two. That's my 2 cents. You can take that and do whatever you want with it. But to my notes then. Well, as you likely know, the law on marriage and family and related considerations that have been operable for the better part of 2 millennia, marking Western civilization and sustaining its structure and world, recently have been described by the Supreme Court, other legal entities, and certainly by the elite communities and various precincts of cultural elevation as both phobia and hate. These fancy, influential, and governing classes in our society are now committed to overthrowing the testimonies of reality itself. And many of the recognitions shared by civilizations across the earth since the dawn of time, since creation. And specifically, our betters are now telling us in a perfectly consistent sequence of commitments the following audacious ideas. For instance, that male and female are categories of irrelevance to both the marriage relationship and to the design of human community itself. That the objective and visible composition of the human body in its reproductive dimension is a mere brute biological fact that has no relevance or meaning to the identity of the individual human being. That those most vulnerable, innocent, nascent human life may be justly destroyed when that is convenient for those who are more powerful than. And so on the list goes. We won't be spending too much time wandering through these septic corridors this morning, although as 21st century Americans, we're certainly consigned to do precisely that due to the nature of the cultural condition that we find ourselves in. But the concerns about innocent human life, about the definition, the meaning, and the significance of marriage, about the immutable identity of persons within the male-female sex binary, these are indelibly connected and mutually informing areas of consideration. They treat exactly the significance of our presence in the world as bodies, and the significance of that fact to the social and legal structures that acknowledge, protect, and honor human nature. The meaning of our created, embodied existence is the battleground of our day. And on such matter, we face adversaries around us on all sides, these including notably those that are found within the ranks of the law itself. that the law is presenting itself as hostile to us now is particularly grievous, because what is in play in our day is precisely the meaning of the human person as such, or even if there is a particular meaning to be found in humanity. And in such an environment, the public design and function of the concepts of religion, of freedom, and law itself are likely to be handled with something less than integrity, as I aim to later elaborate. But manifesting how complete has been the moral reversal in our day, now populating the public category of evil are those who would interfere with or aim to regulate or even express disapproval of, rather than affirm and celebrate, certain deeds and ideas that quite recently were considered to be unspeakable. Which brings us to the likes of the litigants who are grabbing headlines these days for opposing the trans crusade, the abortion policies, and the marriage redefinition project. You're no doubt familiar with some of these legal conflicts. For example, we've seen the pinch brought to bear on those whose businesses include wedding or wedding reception services, such as photographers and bakers and florists, and as now is before the Supreme Court, website designers, who are subject to non-discrimination ordinances that are being interpreted to require their participation in same-sex celebrations, or else they face legal penalties and potentially loss of livelihood. Likewise, we've seen pharmacists compelled to stock and sell abortifacient drugs, or employers to provide in their insurance policies for their employees coverage for these contraceptions, abortifacients or no, or even for surgical abortions themselves. Adoption services are being compelled to close their doors in a number of jurisdictions because their policy of placing orphaned or abandoned children only in homes where they will have a mother and father rather than same-sex custodians. And as Greg will be elaborating in the next presentation, the trans juggernaut, with its defiant redefinition of human nature, is, of course, demanding submission and cooperation from educators and employers and property owners and sports teams and medical and therapeutic professionals and mothers and fathers. There is connected to this, of course, the pronoun inversion crusade that requires that we lie about persons and about human nature, to lie about that which is utterly basic and irresistibly present to us in and from conception and birth and onward. That is the maleness or femaleness of persons. So this new obligation requires that we must, on pain of fines, perhaps even loss of employment, call a he a she and vice versa, or out you go. This perhaps is a pristine illustration of the malevolent and farcical character of the cultural condition that we now find ourselves in. So these are but a few examples from the long list of points of conflict between citizens who are aiming to live faithful lives in keeping with the objective norms of created reality and the coercive agencies that are aiming to stamp out such integrity from community life, thereby banishing the very mores and conduct that testify to the limits and roots in created nature that the revolution is aiming to suppress from view and from legal acknowledgement. Now, I'll emphasize that the high cost of the new legal order is not just for the circumstances of these individuals and businesses that are being prosecuted for refusing to lie down flat before Nebuchadnezzar's image. But the broader cultural conditions is one that I'm concerned about, that's being faced by all persons generally in a social order that has now had, in many respects, the truth yanked out from it, or yanked out from the very structures of governance that are supposed to be guiding and protecting the community toward honoring the truth in its designs and regulatory work. Okay, so thus far the setup of the circumstances that are now present to us, and thus the provocations for this new and prominent variety of religious liberty claims that are being raised by a number of people who are being, shall we say, maltreated in this context. But by way of introduction and foundation to the later discussion on those kinds of things, I would like to give attention now to the fraught nature of the modern concocted categories of secular and religious. That is the framework within which religion is deemed to be a subjective and privately entertained alternative to the public truths found in state exercises of power and influence. I recall a sardonic blog post that was presented by the sociologist Peter Berger a number of years ago that was entitled "Religion as an Activity Engaged in by Consenting Adults in Private," in which he described this new American secularism as being in defense of these family eviscerating policies that I was just alluding to. So to that project now I turn. One of the self-legitimizing boasts of political liberalism, and by saying political liberalism, I don't mean left politics, I mean the political philosophy of the modern West in general. But one of its boasts is that it engages in what's called secular neutrality. That is, our government, we are told, does not, or certainly should not, subscribe to any controversial religious or other so-called comprehensive narratives, but instead ideally governs us with secular precepts of common ground rationality. That is, those standards and values acknowledged across the board by reasonable citizens, be they those who do or do not hold to any particular religious faith. And those divisive religions, by the way, need to be kept private so as not to disrupt the unifying rule of the neutral and religiously indifferent state. Well, that's a lovely idea, but it's also pure fantasy, not only because it's a false description of the state's operation, but also because it's an impossible ideal for reasons that I aim to explain. Nevertheless, on this account, secular refers to the supposedly neutral and common part of life, the shared world of logic, of empirical observation, science, and fact. Religion, or so the story goes, is the fundamentally private, otherworldly realm individuals select for the comforts that it provides the soul. In a familiar rendering of this, religion is properly consigned to pews and hearts, tender hearts and homes. This rendition of the boundary communicates that religion is a publicly irrelevant pastime that is cleanly divisible from the rest of life in public. So secular reason, not religious faith, so-called, is to govern the public space of law, justice, and social ordering. We see then that corresponding to the secular-religious divide is its inseparable companion, the public-private apartheid, so central to liberal social theory. Indeed, apart from that public-private divide, the secular-religious distinction loses its point. The whole reason and purpose of having a secular and religious distinction is to establish which ideas get to regulate the society and which ideas don't. You with me? Yet this common secular versus religious framing of the matter obscures the fact, and surely is intended to obscure, that what is called a religious view of life is in an important dimension precisely like any other competing view of life. And everyone maintains one, by the way, whether we call it secular or religious, in that such orienting ideas or worldviews organize and set in place all other ideas, facts, and values. It is inevitable, for instance, that a government is going to organize itself and take official positions based on some conception of the human person, of causation, of individual responsibility, moral precept, authority, its own legitimacy, and so on. And those standards themselves are only made sensible in terms of a certain network of deep commitments about reality, or what we, at least for today's purposes, might call a religion. For me to say that we all maintain a religion seems odd to us only because our society's glossary or vocabulary police have so carefully guarded this term religion to ensure that that category and its associated public handicaps do not apply to the ideology of liberalism itself and its boundless ambitions of total public dominance, but instead only to its competitors, which in the US experience is chiefly Christianity, whose public place and influence in Western society liberalism has supplanted, as enabled by precisely this ideology in this presentation that I'm discussing now. As the late legal historian Harold Berman put it, I quote him, "Liberal democracy was the first great secular religion in Western history, the first ideology which became divorced from traditional Christianity and at the same time took over from traditional Christianity, both its sense of the sacred and some of its major values. Professor Berman elsewhere has offered that the reserving that word religion only for the monotheistic faiths is a gerrymandering of that category so that other comprehensive faiths, like Marxist materialism, for instance, are not included in that category and thus are free from the restraints and disqualification from public authority. And that manipulation of the category of religion is the very mechanism by which governments establish their favored theologies, I'd like to call them, in the monopoly position as ruling precepts for the society. Accordingly, he was looking at the circumstance of the former Soviet Union, and Professor Berman writes that the public teaching of so-called scientific atheism is required in all schools and is promoted in the press and elsewhere. Thus, atheism, by claiming to be not a religion, but a science or a philosophy, is in fact established, and traditional religions are withdrawn from public discourse. So the long and short of all of this is that the modern state, its protestations notwithstanding, has established in the ruling position a sectarian or partisan faith to which all others are subordinated, thus inflicting on the populace the very mischief it says it is saving the society from by forbidding public entry to religion. As Aristotle said to us, you cannot deny a philosophy without implying one of your own. So also with theology, if that's even a materially different category on this analysis, as it too is a description of the world and our place and responsibilities in it. So we may exclude certain formulations of philosophy or of theology from public or government contexts, but exclusion of some serves only to privilege a favored competitor, a competitor that asks and answers all of the very same questions. It is not to eliminate the category itself from public life. Remember, the very coherence of knowledge and of human existence itself relies on a structure of meaning and understanding through which the individual data that we confront are related and made sensible. That is, religion in the broad sense that I'm now using it, which, by the way, is not the specific sense that it's used in the First Amendment, and certainly not the way that the Supreme Court uses it. But this coherence grid, so to speak, that I'm referencing, is a necessary condition of the intelligibility of existence. Religion is not simply one of those things in this category of options that we either pick up or put down. It doesn't matter one way or the other. For a particular act or value or argument or policy to be deemed rational and found persuasive, it must be vindicated within an accepted description of reality. Therefore, we have reason to appreciate Winthrop Hudson's observation, although lots of people have made this point, that when the First Amendment was adopted, no one thought that the idea of separation of church and state implied any separation of religion and politics. And that's not simply because of the scripture-saturated nature of public discourse at the time, although that's true. But I'm proposing the separation is an impossibility for the same reason that it's impossible to keep someone from having a reason for acting. The big questions always will be asked and answered in public life. The issue is whether the answers must now be narrowly drawn from a shallow ideology that distinguishes itself by censoring from the conversation the Christian competitors so that it can burn to the ground the millennia enduring precepts and standards of civilization. And those of you who have been awake for the last number of years know that that's precisely what's going on right now. Now, to push the historical point that joins the theoretical one that I was just setting forward, we might look to, say, Professor William Cavanaugh's work as one of many representatives that are together producing a torrent of scholarship, probably over the last 50 plus years, that has been giving witness to both the incoherence and the recent vintage of this secular religious dichotomy as it has been presented to us most recently. As Kavanaugh summarizes, I quote him, "Religion, understood as a discrete category of human activity separable from culture, politics, and other areas of life, is an invention of the modern West." And again, he writes, "In the pre-modern West, there simply was no conception that Christianity was a species of the genus religion, a universal interior human impulse, reducible to propositions of beliefs essentially distinct from secular pursuits such as politics and economics. So also, we might look at what Brent Nombre has written, that experts in this field of historical scholarship have observed that no ancient language has a term that really corresponds to what modern people say, or what they mean when they say religion. That is, it's not only these kind of pre-modern people never gave attention to the concept, they didn't have a word that permitted it. They've noted, these historians, that terms and concepts corresponding to religion did not appear in the literature of non-Western cultures until after those cultures first encountered European Christians, modern European Christians, that is. He goes on to observe that the very idea of being religious requires a companion notion of what it would mean to be not religious, and this dichotomy was not part of the ancient world. You know, sometimes we forget or never even come to realize how much we are captive to the prevailing concepts and forms of analysis of our day. But he writes again that the terms secular and religious grew out of Latin predecessors, and the ancient words did point to a dichotomy, but not what is typically understood in the modern secular religious division. In late medieval Latin, and even in early English, these words describe different kinds of Christian clergy, with religiosus describing members of monastic orders and secularists describing Christian clergy not in a monastic order. By the way, this usage persists in among Catholics even to this day. Making a parallel point after evaluating the history of the terms religious and secular, Professor Steve Smith observes that religion is the story through which we process, judge, and categorize the temporal matters of life. So he says, secular should be a subset or an aspect of religion, not something that is to be distinguished from religion. And get this, he says, so asking whether something is religious or secular would be like asking whether you found a particular quotation in a book or on a page. Alas, the usage in our contemporary case law, dominant scholarship, and the concepts, just available in the contemporary vernacular does not follow what I've just been presenting to you. Now, in keeping with the contemporary confusions on the concepts of religion is the Supreme Court's interpretive mangling of the First Amendment Establishment Clause. You're familiar with this. First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, by which the court has treated that constitutional provision that was directed to forbidding a national church, by the way, instead as a mandate to exclude and remove the, quote, poison of Christian precept from all practices and rationales of public life and the regulation of the state at all levels of government, thereby, again, ensuring monopoly control over legal categories and designs to a competing vision of life. Now, this has ensured, when I say this, I mean the Supreme Court's interpretation, has ensured a wreck of other judicial analyses also, including those that are touching on states' traditional authority to regulate the health and safety and morals of the communities. Now we're getting back to the culture war conflicts that we were speaking of earlier. This judicial method of evacuating Christian precept from the law has led courts in recent years to facilely dismiss moral and anthropological and theological insights as being mere bigotry or discrimination, or otherwise just constituting nothing other than private opinion, and thus disqualified to guide government decision-making and its explanations. So this conceptually anorexic climate is manifest in a number of Supreme Court cases of recent years that have served to upend the historic social order. Recall the court in Roe versus Wade had feigned ignorance whether the unborn are even persons that would merit legal protection. The court essentially urging who can really know the answer to such a question, and therefore instructing that governments nationwide are forbidden to enforce laws that protect the lives of these inscrutable entities that are found in the womb, whose identity and meaning is simply unknowable to judges across the land. Note, though, that the question of the unborn child's legal status was emphatically and dogmatically answered by the court, as it was feigning ignorance and pretending philosophical humility, wasn't it? Later came the other abortion cases, and then the sodomy and the marriage redefinition rulings, in which the court relied on notions of individual self-definition and autonomy, while the court classified the historic Anglo-American legal position on family and on intimate relationships as being false, bigoted, and dehumanizing. Now here, you might recall in particular the illustrative and the watershed case of United States versus Windsor from 2013, in which the court had invalidated the Federal Defense of Marriage Act that defined marriage for purposes of federal law as the relationship of husband and wife. The reason for the court striking that law being, in short, that the court found it to be a display of spite and villainy intended to injure and degrade gay households. In this case, we find the innovators, that is the court majority, calling the traditionalists, meaning the elected legislators as well impliedly as all of human history, as being schismatic for attempting to hold the line legislatively against cultural pandemonium. The Supreme Court in that case had designated that law aimed at marriage and family preservation as being, quote, a bare desire to harm a politically unpopular group. This, by the way, is somewhat discouraging that our highest judicial tribunal speaks this way about the most fundamental, most central human institution that's guarding human nature. Now, in the process of rulings such as these, the message conveyed from our citadels of law is that the field of family and of sexuality, a form of sentimental nihilism, is the requirement of justice. And restraints found in the historic definitions on marriage and family regulations are merely religious, meaning either irrational, private, or bigoted. Thus, we have the contemporary legal cultural standard that designates what is public and what is private, and therefore the categories and standards within which we may register our disagreement with these new presentations in the law. Which brings us back to the whole field of contemporary religious or conscience freedom discourse, that, and this should not surprise you by now, just so happens to crowd out the questions of truth, replacing them instead with the category of toleration for manageable private acts of sincere subjectivity. So religious liberty is, in contemporary standards, redefined into legal indulgence for certain subjective preferences grounded in publicly inadmissible ideas. As a result, I'm constrained to offer something of a cautionary reflection here for our consideration, urging discernment in our priorities and perspectives in this field of religious liberty discourse as it arises in the context of persons who dissent from family structure ruination, let's call it, that's going on around us. We consider this, I think, in association with the arrival of Obergefell's civil marriage redefinition, as well as in the work of the transgender juggernaut in its program. So, a proposal for your consideration. The Christian community's haste after a court decision like Obergefell, redefining civil marriage, or Bostock with its new sexual orientation and transgenderism mandates, the temptation to make our first concern and rhetorical emphasis our continued enjoyment of our prerogatives as Christian employers, Christian organizations, and the like, carries with it the possibility of obscuring the fact that something more fundamental has been inaugurated. Namely, the very nature of the human being has been publicly adjudicated in a way that repudiates the truth of the person as God has created it. Thus, those who love God's truth, who love their neighbors, are concerned with the foundations and healthy continuation of social order, should assign principal sorrow to this assault on family and children and society, implicated by this insolent repudiation of God, creation, and the uniform witness of human civilization through all time. Secondly, and related, this concern about freedom or liberty called forth by the Supreme Court's abolition of marriage is more profound and encompassing than simply a loss of prerogatives for Christian dissidents, such as the elimination of tax-exempt status, the loss of institutional accreditation, the prohibition on virtuous employment and hiring determinations, and so on. Now, clearly, these are very grave problems, and I'm not diminishing that at all. I'm suggesting, though, that they are of lesser magnitude than others that are in play. And what I'm aiming to convey here is that the liberty of the family itself, and thus liberty at all, as a possession with a meaning beyond mere state allowance is what is at stake. Under the logic of the same-sex so-called marriage regime, for instance, there is no pre-political natural family with an authority and an autonomy to which the state must submit and defer. There are now only legal relationships of state invention, control, and regulation. Thus, as a friend of mine has put it, the national establishment and law of marriage redefinition marks a decisive step forward in the state's triumph over the family as an institution that precedes, transcends, and limits it, effectively abolishing the last natural or given limit to the power of the political order. So perhaps by now you can see the totalitarianism resident in this insertion of mayhem into the law. And no real defense to it is going to be found in the contemporary conception of liberty or freedom, which is, on the common understanding, in fact, its opposite. Consider the Supreme Court's infamous and appalling sweet mystery of life passage that has captured our current cultural vision in a single sentence. I quote it: "At the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, and the mystery of human life." End quote. Liberty is now popularly and widely conceived of as the condition of release from an authority external to the individual mind. This denies the connection of freedom to truth and to an objective and shared reality. The body, tradition, custom, the natural family, then, with their claims upon us, are now being postured as potential forms of bondage that the state must protect us from. You see? This, by the way, explains why state power is now being used to overcome the resistance of parents to permitting their own children to be trans. You see? The state is setting up these kids, or it's releasing them into a condition of freedom from the bondage of limits, of the family, of creation itself, of the body. You see? We're being liberated to become self-manufacturing products. Thus, the idea of religious freedom, or freedom generally, I would say, is not separable from all of this that we've been talking about. The very conceptual grounding and possibility for true freedom is being eaten away by this solvent that is defiantly redefining the human being and the character of nature and of the world that we inhabit. Do you suppose we could do all of these things to the created order, but still preserve intact some pristine and lovely vision of liberty itself? And because the discourse on the nature of reality, the real things that are ever before us in the world, is by Supreme Court case law excluded from legal discourse, though of course it's continuously being resolved by court decisions, the area where dissent is permissibly registered is narrowed down to the field of individual constitutional rights. As a result, when defending individuals against the oppressive features of law, of the sort that we've been discussing, that is, the government's atrocious assaults on human nature and the very foundation of viable social order, these are not ordinarily identified as such, but rather are being addressed for their secondary effects as attacks on individual conscience. And so the litigants resisting, for instance, forced participation in wedding receptions for same-sex couples, or being compelled to use transgender versions of pronouns and the like. These are often being described, these clients, these litigants, as, at least in the public relations messaging associated with the cases, are being described in terms of they are standing for artistic freedom or for freedom of speech. Now, to be sure, from one vantage, they are doing those things in their circumstances, being litigated under First Amendment standards, offering relief to such persons designated according to those categories themselves. And it is assuredly true that there's an important principle of human integrity that is at stake in not being coerced into speaking a message disbelieved or participating in a ceremony of sorts that you abhor. But that important principle, which is important to be shored up in the law, is one that can be vindicated by anyone, be it the saints or they're the alternative version, And nowadays, though, it has been the saints that have been working to shore up that principle. But those saints, first and foremost, are standing not for artistic freedom. They're standing for the meaning of life and marriage and family, male and female, and the social world that is anchored in place only when such meaning is being publicly acknowledged. Now, whether these litigants are able to clearly articulate it or instead just maintain something of an inchoate sensibility to this effect, they are willing to face off with the state because they are oriented by an awareness that their position represents the hinge on which the door to the real world is open. Those persons that we call advocates for artistic freedom or religious liberty victims are far more than that. They are witnesses holding forth for and giving testimony to human meaning itself, refusing to let go of the world as it really is. And all of this to say, modern First Amendment and freedom of conscience case law precept is not and should not be the exclusive horizon of public discussion and advocacy about such persons and their conduct. You follow? When we reconceive the role and the message of the dissident, the religious liberty dissidents, as we call them, is fighting only for the procedural allowance to wallow unmolested in personal subjectivity, because that's how the law classifies him if he is to be given its toleration, rather than acknowledging his testimony is being given to a public truth that indicts the deviance of public policy. The nature of that person's witness, his or her testimony, is being altered or diminished somewhat. So my point here then is that it's important for us to distinguish between the available mechanisms in the law right now that we can employ to get relief from oppressive policy requirements, and secondly, the indisputable public truths that the dissenter is holding forward. The commitment to marriage, to life, to the fundamental status and relations of male and female are not private religious beliefs grounded in personal subjectivity and comforting preference. They are about the truth of real things, visible to us, publicly essential, apart from which social disaster and legal ruin are a certainty. For our coalition properly to respond to the ferocious vandals who are now pushing an unabashed, comprehensive redescription of reality and existence and meaning, who are not content with anything other than the total repudiation of Christian civilization and any remnants of it, it will be important for us that we apprehend and speak publicly in terms of the nature of the conflict that is principally in play. Religious liberty in its employ these days is a strategic form of respite. It's a legal strategy, and thank God for its availability so that persons can take advantage of it and live lives of integrity as a result. But we must never let its legal function overcome or replace our awareness of the true nature of the contest that's playing out. The conflict is over the nature of the world, over human nature itself, over the cosmos. The infringement on individual liberty to live according to the truth is grievous, and it must be resisted. But that conflict itself is present because the truth has been disqualified from the law's treatment of certain central matters of human nature. We are battling for the public truth of created verities of life, marriage, male, female, and manifest realities that must be incorporated and acknowledged in public life if it is to be a public life worth having. So I'm not against religious liberty. I wholly support it, properly understood. What I am against is the strangled and distorted version of religion, of liberty, and religious liberty, as these are now advertised by our modern consensus that privatizes and marginalizes those religions that it dislikes, principally represented by historic Christianity, to a private realm of dissent and escape, while the broader community is being bossed around and otherwise ordered by an alternative ideology whose only virtues are due to its parasitic reliance on the remainders of the Christian tradition and practices and policies and the like, that it's not yet poisoned to death by its vile administration. Those are by way of my critiques for today, and so end my prepared notes. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Jeffrey. So we'll take a break. We will come back here 9:55 for our next talk. So feel free, fellowship, go ask questions, get some food, and we'll reconvene in a minute.
Oh, yeah. A bunch of projects that kind seating chairs to prevent the sit around the we had a house it doesn't have much it's built on slope. The whole base is like kept accumulating. Yes, exactly.
All right, I am going to summon you back to your seats so that we can listen to our next speaker. Greg Chaffwin is legal counsel with Alliance Defending Freedom. He for legislative advocacy here. He focuses on legislation impacting religious liberty at the state level and works out of ADF's Ashburn, Virginia office. Prior to joining ADF, Chaffwin spent 3 years as a white-collar defense litigator at how do you say that? Wild. Manges, holy smokes. In Washington, D.C., and 1 year as a law clerk to the Honorable Alice on the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. He earned his JD from Notre Dame Law School, graduating cum laude in 2015. While at Notre Dame, he served as president of the Notre Dame chapter of the Federalist Society, member of Journal's editorial board, and a member of the Moot Court Board. So join me in welcoming Greg.
Just project. Oh, there we go. Okay, I'll have to tone down my voice a bit, I think. Okay, so that's me. I wanted to start by thanking you all. We've heard a lot of very interesting talks up here, and I was mentioning before I could give 45 minutes just reminiscing on some of the things we heard last night and this morning. But what's most impressive to me is that you all are here, and many of you were here last night, and what makes America great is our civil societies, our families, our churches, and our communities. And coming out like this, each of you are taking precious time out of your day to learn about religious liberty, to learn about the history of religion in this country. And this is what will make America great. You're inviting your friends to come to churches with you, forming families, growing your families. So really, thank you guys for being here. Thank you, Blaine, wherever you are, for inviting us. Thank you, Pastor Stewart, for having us here. It's really, really an honor and a privilege. So I want to start with a quote from a president that I met. Oh, let me first let you know what I'm going to talk about. So religious liberty and then the transgender moment. It's a lot to cover. I tend to speak quickly. I'll try to slow it down. Forgive me if I rush too much. Religious liberty, I want to give you an overview. This is a boot camp. So my idea was that I would let you guys know the state of play. So we've heard a lot about what we would like to see, the nature of religious liberty, how we ought to put the state underneath God, how we should live our lives. I want to let you know a bit about the history, what the courts are doing, some of the clients that have suffered, what states are doing to address this issue, and what you can do to address it. With regards to the transgender moment, people I know have differing degrees of how much they have heard about what's going on with the transgender moment. On the news, you frequently see these male swimmers competing against female athletes. Many states, Idaho was first among them to pass a bill to protect women's sports. This is also in the schools. And with this section, I hope just to explain a bit, an overview of what's going on, how we can think about it. And so if you get into a dialogue with somebody, it's not just my view versus your view, but you can understand what they're thinking and why we think what we think, hopefully to get to a better outcome. And I'll explain a few of the people that are suffering and litigation and some of the things states are doing to address it. So to start off with religious liberty. So President Ronald Reagan, this is a quote that I'm sure many of you have already heard, but I think it's worth repeating, is that freedom is a fragile thing. It's never more than one generation away from extinction. Now, he said this at a time when the great enemy was communism in Russia. I was born when the Berlin Wall was falling. And these words are still true today. And we have to remember that now the threat's not coming from China, from Russia, the communist Russia, which it's in Ukraine and it's bad. And now it's more about China and the supply chain and all the things they can do. But the greatest threat, one of the greatest threats that we're seeing is coming from within. It's within our walls. And every freedom, all these precious freedoms that we have, can be lost. And another thing he's saying is once you lose that freedom, it's almost impossible to get it back. Our founders fought so hard to give us this precious freedom, limited government, so that civil society, each of us can practice our religion and live in our society and grow our families without the abuse of government. And we're at the cusp of losing it because of these modern ideologies that want to use the government to force us to not practice our faith, to believe other things. So imagine you turn on the news in the morning and you hear about all of the churches closing because they've lost their tax-exempt status because they will not marry two men or two women. Imagine you turn on the news and you hear that there are no more Christian doctors because to be a doctor, you have to agree to perform an abortion or euthanasia, things that no Christian can agree to. So no more Christian doctors. Imagine universities can't be Christian anymore because they have to teach the new gender ideology. And these are not far-fetched ideas. These are things that policy preferences that people have already put out in legislation are arguing for. Last year, or when the election happened, the Equality Act is being pushed, and that would exempt, so it pushes the gender ideology and it excludes religious protections. As Jeff was saying before, we need to not just protect ourselves with this concept of religious liberty, but we need to be speaking truth about marriage and about gender. Men and women are different. But at least we still have the shield of religious liberty. But what the left wants to do is to get rid of even that and say, no, I'm sorry, need not apply. And that would directly lead to the shutting down of churches that can't pay their taxes because they have no longer tax-exempt status. So dire, and we've heard a lot of other scenarios of the problems. I will get to solutions later. But think of what the alternative is. You wake up in the morning, you turn on the news, and you hear about the church community that went out and fed the hungry. The church community that took in poor people when there was a terrible storm moving through town, about neighbors helping neighbors. In a time of crisis, that people went to church to pray for their communities. These public proclamations of fasting and humility that we heard about last night. Imagine how good that would be. And that's the alternative future that we can hope for and that we can strive for. So you are all here because you care about these issues, and this is what you guys are fighting for. So invite your friends to this. Invite your friends to this church here. Volunteer for these Christian services to do outreach and to minister to our neighbors. This is what I would encourage you all to do so that we don't lose the precious freedom. But of course, in order to talk about this, we've heard a lot about this topic already of what is religious liberty, and so none of my slides have been used before as far as quotes and things, so I'm glad for that. I'll give you just a few more reasons why religious liberty matters. So first we'll talk about some practical reasons from some of our founders, and then just by the nature of what religious liberty is, of why it should be protected. So religion is, so this is one definition, so I'll read it out so you don't have to read it if it's too far. But So this comes from the Virginia Declaration of Rights. And I chose this one just because it highlights a few facets of what our founders were considering when they were making the Constitution and what our founding generation thought of when they were thinking about religious liberty. Not that this is not saying that this is the catechetical correct answer. This is just one concept of how our founders were thinking about religious liberty. So religion, or the duty which we owe to our Creator, the manner of discharging it, which is directed by reason and conviction and not by force. So as we move forward, a few things just to keep in mind of what is religion and what is not religion. Religion takes into account the fact that there is a creator. You know, I'm sure many of you know, nowadays, not many people realize that. We heard earlier that people think that, oh, there's, what was it, like the cosmological theology or something like that that was mentioned before, that there is no need for a transcendental truth or a spiritual life. This world is all we have. No, that's completely wrong. There is a creator. And there's a creator means we're the created. And the fact that we are created by the Creator means that we have a duty owed to our Creator because we are created by Him. And as Christians, believing that this Creator, that God, so loved the world that He gave His only Son, who died for our sins, to reconcile us with the Father if we believe in Him, there is a huge duty. It's the highest duty that we have in our life. So again, and going back to, and again, I can comment on everything that was said before, but the fact of liberty being this liberation from any sense of authority is ridiculous. We have a duty to God, to the Creator. And so religion is about fulfilling, of discharging that duty to the Creator, which is led by reason and conviction, which is our conscience, and not by force. So the state has no jurisdiction over our hearts. The state cannot tell us to worship. It cannot tell you who to love. It cannot tell you who to marry, thank God. So where do we see religious liberty played out in society? Worship, here in the four walls of a church. Obviously, it's not limited to this, but also in our private prayer. This can be done here in a church building or at home, silent, in the silence of your heart, with your words, with your neighbors, in public or in private. And very importantly also to keep in mind are ministries, Christian ministries that will go out, have organizations that are designed to shelter the homeless, to feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, to care for the sick, and to spread the gospel to people through religious organizations that are active in their communities. And of course, as we said before, just living your faith in public is the exercise of religion. The Supreme Court is recognizing this as well. Some of the justices have commented that it's not just a right to believe or hold private thoughts, but also to do conduct based on those beliefs. So why is this important? So Mr. Washington, our beloved first president, this is a practical reason why it's important. And again, so I think yesterday we had the discussion that some of the truths come from divine law, from up down, and we know them because it's revealed truth. But we can also infer truths going from the ground up. What do we see on the ground? What is inclined towards prosperity? And this is Washington's quote, talking about the importance of religion and morality in society. So that of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable. So political prosperity. It's important. One thing is a matter of truth, but that to have political prosperity, you need religion and morality. He calls them the firmest props of the duties of men and citizens. So religion and morality is something that supports the nation. And the mortal sin of having slides is putting too much text on them, and I did because I wanted to include this last part. That reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle. What is he saying here? He's saying, so today we're seeing a lot of people saying, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. I like the feelings, but I don't like all of the theology behind it, or having to go to church and all of that. Washington is pointing out 250 years ago that reason and experience, they've seen this through everything that's happened in Europe, that you can't have morality in your society if you don't have a religion to back it up. So we need religion to support our society. Next is our second president, John Adams, who he had a more active role for the church in states. So at the founding, you had the federal government created for limited powers that wouldn't interfere with establishments of religion. John Adams up in Massachusetts was more in favor of the state being related. The states did have establishments of religion, as we discussed last night. But so he thought that there was a more active role for the church in society. But what he pointed out in this quote is that the government does not have the power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. The Constitution was made for a moral and religious people, wholly inadequate to the government of any other. So what he recognizes that by making a government of limited powers, in this country, we are the sovereign. We are free citizens to develop our virtue, our families. The government cannot interfere with ourselves. And so what happens when you get this mass population of unbridled passions that do not have religion and morality to constrain it? The government can't stop it. Unfortunately, we're seeing the government doing things to enter into our lives, to try to tell us things because they think that's the right way to create a utopia. But they don't have the authority. It's against the Constitution when they do all of these overreaching. But because we've lost, our Christian society, we've given up so much of the influence that we have. Now we have the certain politicians thinking that it's their job to replace religion and morality in our lives. So again, why does religious liberty matter? Those were a few practical considerations. Now I want to speak about the truth of the nature of religious liberty, based on the authority, the God-state relationship as a matter of conscience, and it as a matter of rights. So as a matter of authority, a few scriptural references here, talking about the fact that, of course, and this is all common sense to us here, and we've heard it a lot already last night, but that God is above the state, and the greatest commandment is to love God with our whole heart, mind, and soul. And when Jesus was asked about paying the taxes to the state, render unto Caesar Caesar's and to God's God's. We protect religious liberty because by nature, and not, again, as Jeff was saying, not to downplay religious liberty and put it into these little boxes and put it aside. No, this is a robust concept of what religious liberty is and why it is and how it should be protected. But the state is underneath the realm of religious liberty. I think in law school, one of my fine professors was explaining how it used to be the thought that the religious sphere was all-encompassing, and the state had a small sphere within that. And over time, what's happened is it's this opposite thought, and it's the incorrect thought that we're fighting against, but that the state is now all-encompassing, and religious has this little sphere of autonomy within it. And that's incorrect, and there's a lot of academia and a lot of court cases that are pushing that incorrect view out. As a matter of conscience, we all know that the law is written on our hearts. Our conscience is directed towards the true, the beautiful, and the good. And we have to follow our conscience. We have to do what is right and avoid what is wrong. And so religious liberty is a matter of protecting our rights of conscience. And as a right, so, in rights talk is more of a newfangled. You can have a semester long just talking about whether rights is a good way to talk about our how we live in this world or not. But using the language that our founders used and how they discuss this as a pre-political right. So we were created by God. Absent any state, we have a duty to respond to God. The state does not give us our religious liberty rights by virtue of our very nature. Now, this is the Lockean, Jeffersonian way of talking about rights, and not to say that this is the only truth. There are many ways to explain this, but we need to remember that the state does not grant us these religious liberty rights. And in fact, our founders were wise in recognizing the truth in the Declaration of Independence. So 3 facts I want to point out. 1, that we are all created equal. We are endowed by the Creator with inalienable rights. Now, this is just recognizing the fact that God created man, and that by virtue of our human nature, we have the right to life and liberty, religious liberty, and that governments are instituted among men to protect these rights. So government didn't exist before us. We created the government to protect these fundamental rights that we have. But there's a question. Up to what point? We have many fundamental rights, but the right to speech. You can't incite violence. Copyright laws stop you from saying certain things. Parental rights. If you abuse your child, seriously abuse your child, you will lose the parental rights. You cannot kill people, even if it's done in the name of religion. Aztecs, sorry, do not apply. So how do you draw the line? When can a state's rule of law, protection of public safety and health, how do courts, so now I'm going to explain what the courts have done to try to draw this line. And, not to say that we need to, we need to push it further as far as we can go to protect religious liberty in all contexts. So don't get angry at me. I'm just going to be explaining what the courts have done and how they are assessing this so that you understand the state of play, so that you can understand how far it's going. How am I doing on time? Okay, great. So courts have used different standards when they're understanding how much they have, what to do when a state is imposing on a fundamental right. This can be applied to different fundamental rights, but I'll be speaking in the context of religious liberty. So up until 1990, the court for a number of years had been developing these questions. So the courts, the Supreme Court in particular, all the courts, but the Supreme Court decides cases and controversies. It means there has to be something that happened in order for the court to be analyzing it and to be deciding on it. And so all of these cases about religious liberty come up from particular cases. And when they all require a government action that is imposing on the religious liberty right. So if there's a substantial burden on religion, then the government can only impose that burden, meaning taking away their fundamental liberty interest to some extent, by showing they have a compelling government interest and that they've taken the least restrictive means to achieve that compelling government interest. To explain it quickly, so the substantial burden side of it is, first, the religious organization or person needs to show the state has passed a law that is stopping me from exercising my religion. If they can show that, then the court will say, wow, I'm going to apply strict scrutiny to that because you have just taken away somebody's fundamental right. So they're going to say, government, why did you do that? Do you have any reason that can justify this? And it's called strict scrutiny because they're saying you have to have the best, like really, really strong reason for taking away this fundamental right, which we institute governments to protect. What's your reason? So if they can show there's a compelling governmental interest, and that's not just it's a good policy or they'll make more money or it'll be really good for a lot of people. No, compelling is the level of they need to do this. You know, people will die or their hand is forced in some way. And even then, even if it's life and death scenario, they need to show that they've put the least restrictive burden on religion. Meaning if there's any other way to protect that fundamental religious liberty right, they need to do it. And I know there may be some of you that are thinking, oh, religious liberty shouldn't even happen. You should just have complete deference to religious liberty. And the problem is when you have the rule of law and you have people of different denominations even, keep in the world of Christianity and don't even think about other religions, but even in Christianity, if you have different denominations saying, for example, so before 1990, you had cases called Sherbert and Yoder. Sherbert of a Seventh-day Adventist who was arguing that she couldn't get employment benefits because she couldn't work on her Sabbath. And there the Supreme Court applied the strict scrutiny test. And she won because they said the state didn't have a good enough reason to impose this on her. And Yoder, you had Amish who didn't want their children to be going to school for the last 2 years of what the state required because the Amish had a way of life about farming and everything. And so you had the state say, no, state, you can't impose your requirements on them. We're going to apply strict scrutiny. But in 1990, we've got a case coming out of Oregon called Employment Division of Oregon versus Smith. And in this case, you had Native Americans that used peyote, which was a controlled substance, and a religious ceremony because they're Native Americans. And it went up to the Supreme Court. And here, the Supreme Court changed its rule. So no longer, if a substantial burden is imposed on a fundamental right, will they say, we're going to apply strict scrutiny. They said, okay, put that aside. If there's a rule that's generally applicable and neutral towards religion, then it's called rational basis. If they have any rational reason for doing it, we'll allow it. So strict scrutiny still exists, but only if the rule isn't generally applicable or if it's targeting religion. So that severely undermined the protection for religious liberty. Immediately after that case, we saw something that, who knows if we'll ever see it again, but huge bipartisan support from DC to protect religious liberty. You had unanimous support in the House of Congress and the House of Representatives, and it was about 97 votes in favor in the Senate. It was introduced by then Representative Chuck Schumer, called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which applied the strict scrutiny test again in statute, not by the First Amendment. The First Amendment, constitutional rights, stronger protection applies across the board, but at least as statute at the federal level to apply the strict scrutiny test for any law that would impose a substantial burden on religious liberty. A few years later, the Supreme Court said that for the federal level that was fine, but they couldn't apply it to the states for federalism concerns. So many states started to pass their own state level Religious Freedom Restoration Acts, RFRAs. Idaho, here you have one. And today, more than half of the states either have a RFRA or their state courts have interpreted their own constitutions to apply strict scrutiny. So that's a bit of the history of where we are. So to give an overview, right now the First Amendment's protection is a bit watered down as long as the rule is generally applicable and neutral towards religion. There was a case this past year called Fulton having to do with the city of Philadelphia denying a contract to a faith-based adoption providers. The faith-based adoption providers won the case. Justice Alito would have overturned Smith, although they just needed 2 justices to agree with him, but they weren't quite ready to jump on board. So we are still fighting to overturn Smith and have that strict scrutiny standard apply across the board. But that is something that we have yet to achieve. So some risks to religious liberty. We saw the closure of churches during COVID. It was 2 or 3 years ago now. Across the board, they were closed, and the real problem became apparent, glaring, when states eased their restrictions and allowed certain businesses to open, but not churches, because churches weren't essential. But that drive-through service was. And here we saw some of the more egregious examples was the casinos in Nevada opening, but churches being kept closed. Or in both in Mississippi and Kentucky, you had police showing up to drive-in services at church. So people would drive in, respecting the precautions, so they would just drive into the church service, listen to their pastor through the radio, and you had police coming, taking down license plates number, and giving fines. When right down the street, people could go through a drive-through. So, in schools, in the context of schools, we've seen cases where states will have public benefit programs to do things like give new playground surfaces to schools that want to have a rubber playing surface. And they denied them just because they were religious. They were slated together, but, you're religious. So they were afraid of the Establishment Clause, thinking they can't provide them funding. In Montana, there's a school funding program where parents could choose a school. They could choose any school they wanted to, as long as it was not a religious school. And in the context of doctors, medical providers, again, so we've had clients of nurses who are forced to participate in abortion procedures, obviously against their conscience, and they're threatened with being fired if they don't comply with those requirements. And this is going also with any licensed professional, lawyers having to follow speech codes, realtors too. So solutions. In the courts, we've seen victories for churches in the context of school closures, church closures. Ultimately, it was saying that states cannot treat religious organizations any worse than any other business that they're allowed to open. They had to say this repeatedly to many states like California that kept putting restrictions on Bible studies at home, but ultimately the courts are ensuring that religious organizations are not treated any worse. On the legislative side, states are passing laws. Many states, more than 15 or 20 states, have passed laws saying that the emergency powers cannot be used to cancel worship services at all. Or at the very least, they're saying they can't be used to treat religious organizations worse than any non-religious organizations. And at the very least, you have to pass strict scrutiny standard if you're going to do that. And lastly, what we're seeing is personal commitments to faith. I've helped testify in various states on these religion is essential bills that keep churches open in emergencies. And pastors have all come out to express the role that their church had in their lives, in their communities through the pandemic. And it's great to see, you all are here, but get your neighbors to be active in your church, because this is what will make our society Christian again, and will make our society have sanity and good laws again. So personal participation. In the school context, again, we're seeing a lot of great cases out of the Supreme Court. So in Montana, they said that there's an amendment called the Blaine Amendment that many states have that says that no state money can go to sectarian schools, which means religious schools. And so they said, no, that's discriminatory. Montana's Blaine Amendment should not be applied. Unfortunately, states will have different languages to their Blaine Amendments, so I would like to create an initiative to get rid of all the state's Blaine Amendments so that they cannot use those in courts. But they're being challenged, successfully so. A few other school religion context things. Right now, the Supreme Court is about to issue a decision in a case you'll hear called Coach Kennedy's case, who was a coach of a football team who, after sporting events, would kneel down and pray privately, not requiring anyone to be with him. Students would go off running, but over time, some students wanted to join him voluntarily. And the school, after years of doing this, one day decided to say, hey, you have to stop doing this. And he didn't. He kept practicing his faith, praying silently after a game. And the Supreme Court has heard this case. They'll be deciding within the month. And so hopefully we'll get a good outcome there. And the last thing I'll point out in the school context for you to watch out for is ministerial exception. So so what it says is that when you're a religious organization, be it a school, a church, a Christian outreach organization, a soup kitchen, and you want to hire people that spread the gospel through your organization, the state shouldn't be imposing these ministers on you. And now minister, so they've used the term minister, but it's more expensive than just a minister. It could also be somebody whose role and responsibility is to carry on the gospel, to fulfill the religious mission of the organization. So that's another area where you can live your faith in public, hire the people that you want to hire, and the state shouldn't be able to step in and say who is supposed to work with you or not. Legislative action, again, repealing Blaine amendments, improving school choice so that people can truly choose any school they want, religious or otherwise. and having a personal commitment to the faith. I believe many of you either homeschooling or do private school in this area, and that's great. If your public schools are great, continue to be religious. As students, you can speak your faith wherever you are. So to continue to be public with your faith and to speak in love and charity to all. Excuse me, not COVID, I promise. Too many airplanes. So from in the context of licensing and what nurses are going through, it's very unfortunate. We're litigating cases. In many cases, we have victories, but they can be ongoing. And just the chilling effect that all of this has on medical practitioners. There are people in states who will not pursue a medical career because they're afraid that they're going to have to agree to do certain things. We have a bill that we're proposing for medical rights of conscience that would protect doctors and healthcare practitioners, nurses, from having to engage in procedures that they have a conscientious objection to. You'd be surprised how difficult it is to get that passed, but action is being done. And to have a personal commitment to faith. And I meant to say this at the beginning, but so what can you do about it? The solution: get in touch with Blaine. Blaine's organization is doing the work needed to see a real change in Idaho and across the country. There are organizations like his across the country. So I'm very optimistic. It's easy to be pessimistic when we see everything on the news, the doom and gloom. But you people here in these seats are here because you want to make a difference and make a change. Blaine is here. His organization is dedicated to making a real change by having legislation passed that creates a society, creates the conditions in which you can grow. The state is not going to make a utopia. We don't believe the state can make a utopia. But what it can do is create the conditions in which you can flourish and you can bring people to church and you can engage in your society. So you guys, the civil society, you're the key to everything. So again, thank you for being here, and do get Blaine's card if you don't have it and hear about what he's doing. So now to the juicier topic. Let's see, how much more time do I have? 15, 20 minutes?
Yeah, about 15 minutes.
Oh boy, okay. So, caveat to begin this, a few things that I just want to share. So it's a very sensitive topic, and in the different circles that you're in, you'll have to be careful about how you speak or not. But the transgender moment is something that has just taken us by storm. As soon as the L, G, and the B were won, they rushed to the T. And it is crazy how quickly they've gone down this rabbit hole, and we're seeing serious effects. I think we have all heard the phrase, ideas have consequences. It's important to remember that bad ideas have victims. So a lot of what's going on in this transgender movement is we're seeing very bad ideas gaining support by activists in Hollywood, in your businesses, in politics. And that is brainwashing. There's probably a more delicate term, but it's brainwashing young people to think a different way about their personhood, their anthropology, who they are as people. So many of these people are suffering from a lie, and they don't know it's a lie. So we have to remember that when we see people that have, what is clinically diagnosed as gender dysphoria, or someone that doesn't have that but just thinks they're transgender, to realize that every person is a person created by God. And Jesus Christ came because he loved each and every one of us. And we need to bring everyone to truth. We need to treat everyone with love and compassion and with respect, and realize that many of these people don't know that they have misconceptions about reality, and that we need to help them come to the truth in love. Just as a disclaimer, so I have no jarring images. The only images I have are that may, just for public awareness, is the images that are used in schools to teach people about children. So the genderbread person and the gender unicorn. So public advisory if anybody wants to shield their eyes. But I'll speak about it, well, just so you can understand what's going on. So the transgender movement. I'm going to start with common sense because we have to start there. The marriage debate, I think, was largely lost because, so Robert George, Ryan Anderson wrote a fantastic book called What is Marriage? The Supreme Court justices, I don't know how many of them read it because they gave an answer of what is marriage. And in their case, they say, oh, well, nobody, it's just bigoted views that Christians hold. No, there's truth behind this. It's common sense. And if we don't explain common sense, people will run roughshod over us and then we'll be confused, which is what happened with the transgender moment. So we are made male and female. God created them male and female. We have XX chromosomes for the ladies, XY chromosomes, and every single cell of our DNA for the men. Not much dispute on that. Every child, and this isn't, these things, you just have to say it because they're intuitive and common sense, but you don't always think it. Every child comes from a male and a female. Genetics. It takes half of one and half another to make a new one. So it takes a man and a woman to make a child. And family, sorry that my slide was expanded there, but you get the picture. It's a family. The family is the basic building block of society now, and it always has been. The family unit, mother, father, children, basic. So I know it's a little bit common sense, but why is this important? It's important because that is all being challenged. And if we don't speak truth in those difficult moments and speak truth with generosity and charity so that people will listen to us, because if we just go, angry, you're wrong, I disagree with you, and people aren't going to listen to us and they're going to keep doing what they want. So understanding what's going on is important to be able to explain it well. So what's happening, we heard about it a bit already, it's this new anthropology. And so I was at a conference earlier this week with the Heritage Foundation, a lot of people in the conservative movement trying to move the country in a good direction. And the president of their group is really focusing on this. And I think this has been underlying a lot of what's been said yesterday and today. It's what we've lost and what we need to get back is anthropology, big word. But it means, who are we as people? What is a human person? Who is a human person? And we know that we are created in the image of God. Male and female, he created them. We have reason and free will. We are, this is our nature. The modern sensibility, instead of focusing on our DNA, the physical reality of how we're created, thinks, no, that's not real, as I think was Jared was saying last night. You know, what matters more is what you think, your relativistic view of reality. So instead of your male or femaleness being based on your DNA, it's based on what you think you are. So instead of being a male, and you think you're female, well, that's what's important. Your DNA doesn't. Change your clothes. Everyone has to call me something different. It's for them, for people that agree with this mentality, it is postmodern, meaning reality isn't what's important. This is something that's imposing on me. I want to liberate myself from physical reality. And they do that by saying that what matters is me. It was the sweet mystery of life passage that Jeff read earlier, that the liberty is about creating your own definitions of the universe. And so again, it's not, so there are people that say they're transgender or that are suffering gender dysphoria, but it's the activists that are really leading the charge. The ones that control the money, control the corporations, are pushing these ESG requirements. So the corporations have to give training to people and say, okay, now you're going to adopt that person's pronouns no matter what they want them to be, and you'll have to follow it. That's what they're pushing. And so here's the genderbread person, the way they explain this to young people, older people too, but in schools, this is what they're using. So the genderbread person. But like we were saying last night, if you build on sand, it will shift and fall. If you build on Christ, it is firm as a rock. This is the first version 1. There are 4 versions of it. And I will explain it. I know it's going to be pretty small for a lot of you. But instead of being male and female, biological sex is here. Instead of being male and female, they've given you 4 other categories to think of when you think of your personhood. So gender identity, it's not just gender. It's gender identity and gender expression and sexual orientation. But gender identity and gender expression. Identity, they say, is what you think of yourself as. Expression is how you express yourself. And so I'm going to keep going because these things evolve over time. One thing to notice is how the line, you have women on one side and men on the other side, female or male. But in the next one, they've changed a bit. The lines are no longer complementary opposites. Now, they're both going in one direction. And not only that, it's kind of hard to see, but you have little boxes here with dots. And the dots are, you don't just get one dot, you get 2 dots, maybe even more if you want. But you have different combinations of gender identity, gender expression, biological sex, and sexual orientation is now changed to attracted to. Sexual attracted to and romantically attracted to, so another category for you to think about when you're trying to figure out who you are. And then let's see, what else did this one change? All right, so they start giving you definitions of gender identity being what you think of yourself based on current gender norms and how the gender norms in society people will think of you as. Same thing with the gender expression. So it's not only subjective based on your own self or what you think gender is, but it's based on what society thinks of as a gender norm for you to then adopt. So it's fluid in the sense that there is no solid ground here. It's all shifting sands. Biological sex is the same. So, but there was a different group that wanted to take this in a different direction, and they were really upset with one term. Can you guess what it was? There's a really oppressive term on this list. Biological sex. So they had the gender unicorn. Maybe the gender person looked a little too much manly or something, but so the gender unicorn, they changed it to, you've got now not 2 lines, but 3 lines, and the 3rd line is for other. You don't want to restrict to male, female, I got other, and sex assigned at birth. And why this is so dangerous, and it's what the medical community is also identifying with, is that it's not just the physical reality of your biology. By saying assigned, they're saying a doctor is going to come in here and assign you based on the doctor's assessment of what you are. So that's not even a fixed category anymore. And of course, the gendered people not being outdone adopted it as well. So now we have the version 4, sex assigned at birth, anatomical sex instead of biological sex, which makes you think they're thinking anatomy can be changed, which dangerous child abuse in many instances, I'd imagine. But sex assigned at birth is now adopted. So it's very concerning to think this is, but this is how they think. This is literally all of these people that are confused and lied to. This is their conception of themselves. Anthropology, male, female, out the door. You create your reality, and the reality you create is even going to change with time. So why does it matter? I think we all have a sort of innate sense of why it matters. But just to point out a few concrete examples of things that we have seen that are happening, a few of our clients, and how people are really being affected in the day-to-day life. So a professor who was in charge of a child clinical psychiatry, he gave a talk at a conference talking about the dangers of transgenderism, and he was removed from his position. Other professors who are told to, so he was a professor of philosophy, and he was approached by a student being asked to be called by a different pronoun, and he said, look, I believe that's false, and I'm not going to say that what's false, but what I will do is I'll use whatever name you want. Like, give me a name, and I'll call you by your last name. Is that good? He said, no. So that the professor being fired. And school athletics, I think we've already heard, and we know well enough about this here in Idaho. These are 2 clients of ours. So women are facing competition against men. You've seen plenty of that with the Leah Thomas issue in the swimming context, in the running context, in the Olympics even. You had the transgender, the male competing in the females weightlifting. But most importantly and most concerning is what it's doing to our children in the schools. This is education. Children, I've got little toddlers at home, a 5-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 1-year-old almost. And we are so careful as parents how we speak to our children, how we instruct them, raise them in the truth. And to think that, for us, we know what's true. And so we help our children understand the truth. But there are a lot of people that don't. And they'll go to public schools, and perhaps the public schools here are very good. Where I'm from, they're not, Northern Virginia area. But people need to know what's true. And unfortunately, when you teach these children these falsities, these are from, so it's not the US, this is a UK study, and I'll show you another one from New Zealand. But that exploding yellow line are females, girls, and their adolescents who are going to transgender clinics. The gray line is for adolescent males, and children are the lower ones. Another graph out of the UK showing explosion, that's around 2016. I don't know how much higher it's gone since then. But when you give these bad ideas, you have victims. Each of these children that go to a clinic, if they get put on these hormone blockers, these puberty blockers, it's changing their lives. And if they stay on them, they have to stay on them for the rest of their lives. And great for the pharmaceutical industry. I'm sure there's a big interest behind it. But these are serious. This is from New Zealand. I mean, just look how it skyrockets. So ideas have consequences, and bad ideas have victims. So the truth of the matter is that we have XX chromosomes or XY chromosomes. It's a matter of fact. These are important biological realities for doctors to take into account when they're treating us. And there's just physical reality behind what we're saying. As a matter of philosophy, there are certain things that we can choose to identify as. Red Sox or Yankees fan, a cat person or a dog person. But I cannot choose to identify as an 80-year-old grandmother. I don't have, time is a reality too. Maybe they're going to get rid of that one soon. But, so I haven't lived that long, and nor do my chromosomes match up. And as a matter of medicine also, no studies have shown that going through these gender procedures help people assuage their concerns. The longest term study out of Sweden, 30 years, has not shown any benefits for people that go through these transgender procedures. I think in Florida, I saw in the news that DeSantis had commissioned a study that will also show similar results, the detrimental effects of transgender procedures, and how no studies, so one of the tactics that people that believe this way use to tell parents that their kids need to transition is seriously, they lie to the parents to have the children transition, and if they don't do it, we're moving to the direction where they'll take the children away. So truth needs to be told to these people. Oh, and even in the school context, there's just so much to talk about on this, but they really are socially transitioning children at school, telling the parents they cannot tell the parents what's happening, and giving these children a whole new way of looking at their life that is utterly false. And ultimately, they would strip these children away from the parents if the parents don't agree with the new anthropology. So what are some states doing to address this? Wrapping up here, these are the solutions. So these are things that states are doing. Get involved with Blaine's group because they are pushing these things forward to actually make things happen. Protecting women's sports, y'all have already done that here. We've seen 16 states already follow your lead. This is just the beginning. You know, some years ago, it was the bathroom issue of not letting males into female bathrooms, and that didn't get much traction. But now with the women's sports, people are understanding there's a difference between men and women. So many states are passing this, and so there should be more things in that line that we can do. Protect freedom of counselors. So in many states, they say you cannot, as a counselor, help a child through their gender dysphoria. 80 to 95% of children that have gender dysphoria, the symptom of feeling that you're in a different body, if you let them be, they will grow out of it naturally. Not so if you give them the hormone blockers. States are stopping transition procedures, especially on minors. For minors, you know, this is a life-changing thing. And, you know, some of these issues, obviously, we all here would love to just make all this happen in a snap. But we're dealing with state legislatures, with people that don't want to stick their neck out for anything nearly controversial. But take as much as you can get. Stop transition procedures, especially for minors. Another thing that we're doing to help that one is to have at least transparency from gender clinics. When you have this flood of people, as I showed you before, floods of people going to these gender clinics, they'll be given hormone blockers. But we need transparency to see, okay, when did they first arrive? What did you speak with them about before you gave them this? What's the result? How is it going? Once you have that information, then you can say, okay, now we need to stop it because obviously there were abuses in the system. And lastly, and this is something that will be growing, I'm sure, here as well, but gender identity, language, and legislation. And so perhaps if Idaho as a state is fine, you'll have cities starting to put this in. This is going to require religious and non-religious organizations to have these gender studies in corporations, or it will require the companies to have to pay for transgender procedures through their insurance plans. Whenever these happen, be vocal. You know, always speaking with reason and with compassion, but call your representative. Reach out to Blaine and say, hey, what can we do about this that I just saw that happened? This is America. We have our government, and it is in our hands. So speak up, get your neighbors involved. We really need to address this seriously. Here's a few resources. I'm wrapping up with this about if you want more information. So the first two are just about the transgender issue in particular. Ryan Anderson's book, When Harry Became Sally, and Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage, about the effects that what's happening with these procedures to the children. The last two are a book by Carl Trueman. They cover the same topic. The second one's called Strange New World, is a simpler, more palatable version of the former, Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. Fantastic book to understand how we got to where we are today, starting from the Enlightenment, perhaps even before that, but moving through the philosophies, Marxism, Freud, and all of this, to how we got to a point where a man can say he's a woman and try to oblige other people to call him that as well. So if you really want to know how they think and how we got to the present moment, I highly recommend these books. So in closing, just remember that every person deserves love and compassion. These are talks that we have to have. We have to convince our neighbors. This is, not just a matter of religious liberty. This is a matter of truth in our society in order to preserve our families and to have children, to make sure the state never takes away our children. We need to make sure that everyone's on the same page here. So everyone deserves love and compassion, but biology is not bigotry. Go out, speak the truth. Don't be afraid of saying these things. The left is, many of them will be motivated, emotionally charged against you, say you want them to die and you want them to go in a hole and disappear. Like, no. We help others by sharing the truth with them. We bring people to Christ by sharing the truth with them. We have to live a fulfilled human life, which we only do in the truth, who is Jesus Christ. So go out, speak to your neighbors, bring them to church, share the truth, read the good books. And just to end, this affects real people. This is a family that was excluded from a farmer's market because people learned that they had traditional views of marriage. And so, and they needed to go to the farmer's market to make money to live, but they were being excluded from society because of their religious views. This is a child from Trinity Lutheran where they had the playground was going to be denied for resurfacing just because it was a religious school. There are a lot of cases out there. Contact Alliance Defending Freedom. Go to our website, adflegal.org. If you ever have a case yourself or if you hear of somebody that needs defense in any of these contexts, We are here to help you. There are many other good organizations, Liberty Fund, First Liberty, Beckett Fund, Thomas More Law Society. So there are groups. Be bold, be faithful, but the most important thing is that freedom is never more than one generation away from being lost. Civil society is what will make this country great again. You guys are proving that by being here. Grow it, volunteer, and really, I am optimistic because I know I'm young, and there are many young people like me that are thinking the same things. And we know, got to put the TikTok down, we got to go out and engage with our neighbors. And that's what we're doing, creating a good society, buying houses together, raising our children together. So, sorry if I've run over time, but these are important topics, and I hope you've enjoyed. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. So we'll take another break. We'll come back at 11 o'clock here for our last talk. So thank you very much. All right, I'm going to summon you all back together, and we're going to have our last talk. Blaine's going to come back up and talk to us once more.
Hello again. Sorry, I'm messing with my mic. Let me get situated. Hi. I hope that these sessions yesterday and today have strengthened your conviction that biblical activism matters. I hope it's been edifying and I hope it's been fruitful. I think to wrap up the boot camp, we're going to have to talk about what it means to, am I getting feedback? Talk about what it means to reclaim a vision for biblical activism. And I'm going to tie that into all that happened during this last legislative session in the state of Idaho, which wrapped up at the end of March. And then, encourage you guys to get involved and provide you with some concrete action steps as to how you can do that. But first, I think one thing that we're going to have to do just very quickly and in a very elementary fashion, if Christians are going to reclaim a biblical vision for biblical activism, we're going to have to tear down some of the myths that prevail, right, among Christians that are repeated all too often in Christian circles, and that unfortunately keep Christians from fulfilling their biblical responsibility to get involved in culture. And so when I go and talk to churches or when I go and talk to Christian schools, I taught in a Christian school for several years, these are two common retorts that I get, right? The first is, isn't cultural engagement just a distraction from evangelism? And that's a sincere concern on the part of many Christians. Why would we waste our time with culture when we have souls to save and time is passing? And then the second retort that I hear, shouldn't we focus on saving souls, not saving culture? Again, that same sort of mentality. And let's take on these objections head on. So let's talk about the Great Commission. What do you think of when you hear the Great Commission? I think most Christians think of evangelism, right? That's what immediately comes to mind. Evangelism, world missions, maybe the church, right? Because there's the requirement that we baptize people. Most Christians think of evangelism and missions. But in reality, the Great Commission is not only about evangelism. So take a look at this. Listen to the Great Commission. Matthew chapter 28. And Jesus came and spoke to them, saying, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even until the end of the age. So I want to focus in on one of the components of this passage, which is when Jesus says, make disciples of the nations, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you. Make disciples of the nations, teaching them to observe all things. Now, is all things here limited to just baptism or salvation? Is the all things here limited to church or your private spiritual devotions? And I would say no, right? The all things is the full counsel of God, right? All things being the way that God has created all things. It's our responsibility to go out and teach the nations how God has created things and how they can conform to God's good design and thereby flourish. So this is sometimes called the cultural mandate of the Great Commission. And it's this cultural mandate that I think in the last several decades, even the last century of Christian history in our nation, this cultural mandate has been neglected by Christians. So notice something else that Jesus says in the Great Commission. And Jesus came and spoke to them saying, all authority has been given to me in heaven and in earth. All authority has been given to Christ. All authority has been given to him. Now make note of that, right? That means Satan is not Lord over the world. Who is? Christ. Christ is Lord over the world. Is Satan Lord over the governments of the world? Not rightfully, right? Christ has been given all authority on heaven and on earth. All things were created for him, we're told elsewhere in the New Testament. All things were created for Christ, not for Satan, for Christ. So Christ is the rightful king and he is the Lord over the earth. It's often said that transformed people transform cultures. Transformed people transform cultures. And that's because when God redeems us through Christ, he renews our minds and he empowers us by the Holy Spirit to use biblical principles to transform and to restore our families, our communities, our nations, and eventually even the world. So we need to begin viewing the Bible as a guidebook for all of life, not just for the religious matters, right? That box of religious things. No, the Bible is the guidebook for all of life. The Bible is our roadmap. It shows us where we should be going as we restructure our families, as we restructure our churches, and as we restructure our schools and our businesses and our governments and our societies, all according to God's design, so that everything may one day recognize Jesus Christ as Lord. If all things were created for him, it's our responsibility to reform and reconstruct all things so that they recognize him and abide by his design. So coming back to the original objection, isn't cultural engagement a distraction from evangelism? I'd respond to that by saying the cultural commission and its the Great Commission and its cultural mandate command us to do both, right? It's not either or. It's not either evangelism or cultural engagement. It's not either evangelism or reconstruction. It's both, right? Jesus calls us to save souls and to save the culture and to transform the culture that we are in. And that's where Idaho Family Policy Center comes into play. That's the mission of what we're trying to train Christians and Christian statesmen to do. So Idaho Family Policy Center is a nonprofit Christian ministry that advances the lordship of Jesus Christ in the public square. We do that three ways. First, we promote God-honoring public policy. Second, we engage the church. And third, we train statesmen to advance Judeo-Christian values. In short, the role of Idaho Family Policy Center is helping Christians fulfill the cultural commission. And so I want to talk about our experience during the 2022 state legislative session. It was a unique experience for me. I came out here in 2019, and I was really shocked when I came out here because I was excited to move to a state that was conservative, right? Idaho's a conservative state. Idaho's a red state. And I just expected, having lived in Washington State and worked in Virginia for a few years, gone to school out in Virginia, spent some time in Texas for a while, I just expected that Idaho, because it's so red, would be conservative. And that the state legislators here would be excited to jump on board with, basic conservative policy reform. I mean, we're not talking about big things, right? The first bill that I worked on in partnership with ADF was the Fairness in Women's Sports Act, which keeps biological boys out of girls' high school and college sports. That's like basic common sense, right? And so you would think, I thought, you move out to a red state like Idaho, man, I'm ready to take this bull by the horns and start getting stuff done. And then I start meeting state legislators and I realize, whoa, something's not connecting, right? Our state legislature, while it is supermajority Republican to be sure, the values held by the state legislators and their willingness to tolerate risk and their willingness to tolerate, cultural condemnation from the progressive areas of our culture does not reflect, I don't think, the general population of Idaho. And, the objection that I kept encountering as I was talking with state legislators about the Fairness in Women's Sports bill, or we worked on a bill to ensure that people cannot change their biological sex marker on their birth certificates. Right, that's a big thing right now. Hundreds of people in Idaho do that every year. So if you're a biological male, just switch your sex marker to female, and think about all the confusion and chaos that causes for law enforcement, for identification purposes, for vital records. Right? There's all sorts of facets to, we need our government documents to actually reflect reality, right? Not even to mention the lesson that it teaches the people that government will recognize you changing your sex, right? I mean, it's crazy. So we were working on that bill, and we were working on another bill as well. All of these passed, by the way, my first year out here. We drafted a bill called Simon's Law that makes sure that parents, if their children are in hospitals and the doctor deems further treatment to be futile, the doctor actually has to tell the parent before the doctor withdraws life-sustaining care, nutrition, and hydration from a child. Again, this is like basic stuff, right? Like if you have your child at the hospital and the doctor all of a sudden tells the nurses to no longer feed your child, like as a parent, don't you have a right to know that? But here in Idaho, just like in most states, there were no protections for that. And we identified all sorts of cases where this has happened, where children were essentially, allowed to die without their parents knowing, while their parents thought that the hospital was treating their kids. And so I'm talking with legislators about these bills, and I keep running into these objections of, oh, that's great, Blaine, that's awesome. Don't you know we're in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals? And because we're in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, we can't really do anything because the court's just going to strike it down. And we're going to waste all this money on defending the law. And, we have to appropriate that money here in Idaho to defend our laws from constitutional challenges. And we don't want to waste taxpayer dollars. We're conservative. We don't want to waste taxpayer dollars defending laws that the Ninth Circuit is just going to strike down anyways. And I kind of felt like it was my job. There really aren't conservative organizations in the state. There's one other multi-issue conservative organization in the entire state. There's no other Christian conservative policy organizations in the state. So I felt like it was my job to kind of shake the legislators by their collar and say, like, wake up. Yes, you're in the Ninth Circuit, but your job as a legislature is to pass good laws. Courts be darned, right? Your job is to pass good policies that allow people to flourish. Whatever the courts do, it doesn't really matter, right? However CNN portrays it, it shouldn't matter, right? Like if we're not going to do it in Idaho, which is fertile ground for this sort of stuff, where are we going to do it, right? If we don't bolster the bulwarks of defense that we have against this like creeping paganism and progressivism that has just captured seemingly every part of society, if we can't do that here in Idaho, where are we going to do it? And so once I started making that argument to legislators, it started clicking, right? It started clicking. And we got fairness in sports passed. We got Simon's Law passed. We got the birth certificate law passed. And sure enough, the Ninth Circuit, or I'm sorry, we had a federal magistrate judge block the birth certificate bill, and we had the federal district judge, preliminarily enjoin the fairness in sports law. So we're still defending those laws in court, but I'm sure, in the end, we will be vindicated because those are good policies, and they allow people to flourish. And so then my second year here, we defunded Planned Parenthood, which was a harder fight than you would imagine. Again, in a supermajority Republican state, how is it hard to defund Planned Parenthood? Shouldn't be. That was a big victory. So coming into this year, we've achieved a lot, and I expected that momentum would keep going, right? And I was shocked when we began running into serious roadblocks that I hadn't experienced since I first moved out to the state. Thought we had overcome some of these trepidations on the part of state legislators. But the one victory that we did have this year is the heartbeat bill. I'll get to the other bills that we worked on that ultimately were not successful next. So just a few quick facts. A preborn baby's heart begins to beat at 18 days of pregnancy, 18 to 21 days. Usually, a preborn baby's heart begins to beat. Most people don't realize that. Fetal heartbeat is detectable through routinely used ultrasound equipment at 5.5 to 6 weeks of pregnancy. So, if your wife has been pregnant in the last really 15 years-ish, the first thing that she does when she goes into the OBGYN, the first thing that they have her do is an ultrasound. And what's the purpose of that first ultrasound is to ensure there's a heartbeat, right? Like that's literally basically the whole first OBGYN appointment, right? When a woman is pregnant these days. And that's because the heartbeat is such a strong indicator of the viability of the pregnancy. So a preborn baby has a 95% likelihood of surviving to term once his or her heartbeat can be detected. That's why establishing a heartbeat is so important early in the pregnancy, because if you can find that heartbeat and it's within the appropriate range, that baby is almost certainly going to survive to term. Nearly 70% of Americans support banning abortion once a preborn baby's heartbeat can be detected. 70% of Americans, including over 50% of Democrats. Now, here's the thing. Most people don't realize that the heart begins to beat so early in the pregnancy, and that's detectable at 5.5 to 6 weeks. So, especially now with the Dobbs case before the Supreme Court, the Dobbs case on the Mississippi law that bans abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy, we keep hearing the stat thrown around by the liberal media that 65% of Americans oppose overturning Roe. 65% of Americans don't want Roe v. Wade overturned. That's true, but that's only because those Americans don't know the development of the baby prior to viability, which is 20, 24 weeks of pregnancy. Americans amazingly, inconsistently hold these two beliefs that we don't want Roe to be overturned, but we want abortion to be banned after a heartbeat is detectable. But you can't ban abortion after a heartbeat is detectable if Roe is still in place. And so these two inconsistent ideas kind of butt up against each other, and it's kind of a funny case study in how Americans understand politics. Now, we're not saying, of course, that life begins with a heartbeat. It does not, right? Life begins with fertilization. At the time of fertilization, a unique, independent child is created with distinct DNA, entirely different from the mother and father. By the time of 21 days, the baby's heart is beating blood through the embryo that is totally distinct and unique from the blood of the mother, right? Its own blood type, oftentimes. And so life begins with fertilization, and that's clear. However, the question is, how do we get to the point that we can ban abortion from fertilization? How do we get there? And the heartbeat bill, I think up until just a few months ago, was thought to be a good stepping stone, right, to getting to the next goal, which is the ultimate goal of banning all abortions. So the heartbeat bill bans abortion when a heartbeat can be detected. And specifically the Texas version of the heartbeat bill, which was passed in the 2021 Texas state legislative session, allowed family members of an unlawfully aborted preborn baby to sue the abortionist in Texas for $10,000. In Idaho, what we did when we drafted the bill for Idaho is we increased that statutory damage minimum to $20,000. So let's say you are the father of the preborn baby, or you're the grandfather or the grandmother of the preborn baby, or your sibling of the preborn baby. If you, aunt and uncle, we were ultimately able to add into the bill. If you are a family member of the preborn baby, you can sue the abortionist who committed the crime, right? And that is a way of enforcing the law and ultimately, persuading the abortionist not to perform the abortions. So, like I said, ours was modeled after Texas. We increased the statutory damages to $20,000. I think we improved upon some of the flaws in their bill. Texas allowed anyone to sue the abortionist, and there are some legal arguments as that could be made as to why you can do that, although I think that those are pretty shaky arguments. Usually in civil court, when you sue someone, you have to be able to prove that you've been harmed, and that ultimately whatever judgment the court renders would redress that harm. And it's hard to argue that someone in Oklahoma has been harmed by an abortion in Texas. There's some historical precedent for it with torts of outrage, where there's such an outrageous behavior that that you are harmed simply by the fact that it took place. Although I think that's pretty shaky, which is why we restricted standing, who can sue, only to the family members of the unlawfully aborted preborn baby, because they have been harmed, right? If you've been deprived of a child or a grandchild or a niece or a nephew or a sibling, you have been harmed, right? And so that's why we restricted standing to just family members. Patty Ann Lodge, senator from Caldwell, sponsored the bill, as did Representative Steve Harris from Meridian. It passed with veto-proof supermajorities in both chambers of the state legislature. And just a few days before Governor Brad Little's deadline to either sign the bill or veto the bill came around, Planned Parenthood issued this email basically saying, we are going to cut off abortions in the state of Idaho if this law is signed by Governor Little. We're not going to perform any abortions at all. It's too great a risk. Which is essentially what's happened in Texas, right? On the day that the Texas law went into effect, Planned Parenthood stopped offering abortions in their clinics. So we were getting really excited, right? We were getting super excited. We passed both chambers. That was more difficult than you would imagine, even in a Republican state, right? For a lot of people, a heartbeat law is too much, too fast, getting too close to conception, not offering the woman enough opportunities to, get the abortion. But we were able to cajole up the state legislature and get it passed, and ultimately we were able to get it signed by Governor Brad Little. Now, Governor Little took an interesting tact. He issued a signing statement in which he said that he believes the law is unconstitutional and unwise, but I'm going to sign it anyways because it's an election year and I can't veto it. But you know what? It makes it harder to defend the law in court when the governor who is signing the bill says it's unconstitutional and unwise. But he signed it, right? He signed it. And so Planned Parenthood, within a few days, announces that they're going to open up a clinic in Ontario, Oregon. Now, for those who don't know, because you guys are hours and hours away, you have Boise, right, in south central Idaho, and the whole Treasure Valley, right? And the Treasure Valley extends out to Ontario. So Ontario is about 45 minutes from Boise. And so Planned Parenthood was making it clear they're going to shut down their clinics in the state. They're no longer going to offer abortions, and we're going to open up this clinic just across the border in Oregon, still within driving distance for everyone from Boise. So, again, we expected this to happen, But this is encouraging to some degree, right? Because it shows we're on the precipice of actually doing this, right? Like we're getting close. We are getting close to banning most abortions in the state of Idaho, which is like the last stepping stone to banning all abortions in the state of Idaho. And then Planned Parenthood files a lawsuit. We expected this. You know, the abortionists and the Biden administration and others had sued the state of Texas, challenging the Texas law. And ultimately, all of those federal lawsuits challenging the Texas law were dismissed by federal courts. Either the US Supreme Court dismissed 2 of the lawsuits, including the one filed by the Biden administration, and the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals dismissed a lawsuit that was filed by some of the medical providers in that state. And so we're on solid ground, right? Like if we've tightened up the language from Texas, we are on solid ground, and I'm not concerned about a federal challenge at this point. And then even in state courts, I'm not really concerned about the state challenge. I mean, there's some like creative ways that the state Supreme Court could rule. There's a state constitutional right to abortion, and Planned Parenthood, when they ultimately filed their lawsuit in state court, not in federal court, because they realized that, you know, for all intents and purposes, they had gotten walloped in the Texas cases. They were absolutely walloped, and they didn't want to get walloped again. So they filed it in state court, and they asked the state court, you know, would you be willing to, you should rather overturn this law on the basis that it violates a state constitutional right to abortion, which is bogus because our state constitution doesn't mention abortion. And when our state constitution was ratified, abortion was illegal in the state and has been illegal ever since then, all the way up until 1973. So Planned Parenthood files this lawsuit, and we begin working with the Attorney General office, Attorney General Lawrence Wasden. We enter into a joint defense agreement with him to work on strategy to defend the law. And I'm feeling pretty good, right? We're meeting every couple of days. And by the way, this is all in the public record at this point. This is all in the media. I'm not sharing anything that happened in confidence or that isn't public at this point. You know, I'm fairly convinced that the Deputy Attorney General who they've assigned to the case is taking the case seriously. And then during one of my meetings, the Deputy Attorney General tells me, Blaine, we've been offered a deal from Planned Parenthood. So a little bit of background. Planned Parenthood asked the court, the state Supreme Court, to issue what's called a declaratory judgment on the constitutionality of the law before the law was scheduled to go into effect on April 22nd. So the law was signed by Governor Brad Little, I think it was March 21st, signed by Governor Brad Little. And so they had essentially 1 month to defend the law. Now, Texas was able to defend their law all the way up to the Supreme Court in like a month and a half. The U.S. Supreme Court, right? Multiple, case battles and emergency appeals in that process. And Texas did a heck of a job defending their law. So there's no reason why our Attorney General office, with his 200 lawyers, the largest law office in the state, can't defend our, pro-life law in that short amount of time. He's equipped to do it. But Planned Parenthood comes to them and says, we will agree to an extended briefing schedule that gives you guys more time to defend the law, gives the state more time to defend the law, if you agree to a temporary stay, where the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court temporarily blocks the law, blocks implementation of it. And this is a deal for you guys to have more time, quote unquote, to muster up your defenses and robustly defend the law. And I'm asked, would you agree to such a deal? And I say, no, I will not. The entire purpose of this law, this is a short-term solution to start saving babies right away. It's a winning strategy. We've seen that in Texas. They're saving babies. I want this law to start saving babies at that time, 2.5 weeks from now. That's when it's intended to begin saving babies. And we have the Dobbs decision coming out this summer that could affect this in any way. This is a stopgap measure in the meantime to save as many babies as we can. And the Attorney General goes, okay, I understand. I will respect that. I disagree with you, but I will respect that, and we will not agree to the deal. And then 2 days later, I get a phone call from a local paper. Blaine, what do you have to say about the Attorney General agreeing to a deal with Planned Parenthood? And I'm like, what the heck? They had told me there would be no deal. So what the Attorney General did is they, along with Planned Parenthood, filed motions in the court asking the court to issue a stay temporarily blocking the law in exchange for an extended court proceeding. And in so doing, it kicked the issue past the primary election, which I think was ultimately their goal. And it also, they knew at this point that the state court now would probably not issue an opinion, issue its ruling, until after the Dobbs case is decided later this month. And they were right. And so effectively, they, for all intents and purpose, made the law a dead letter. They I mean, you might say they nullified it for all intents and purposes. They essentially kicked the implementation down so far out that it would no longer be effective. And that's Attorney General Watson. So the Idaho Supreme Court put a stay on the new abortion law. And this is the court order itself from the Chief Justice of the Idaho State Supreme Court. The parties having both requested action by this court to preserve the status quo, to give the parties the ability to adequately brief this case. The implementation of Senate Bill 1309, the Heartbeat Bill, is stayed, blocked, pending further action by this court. So this is where things start getting really interesting. I make my comments to the press and Attorney General Lawrence. I say in my statement that I'm disappointed that he cut a deal with Planned Parenthood, and now babies will have to needlessly suffer because of it. And he takes issue with what I've said, and he issues this press release that eventually blows up in the local media. Wasden issues this press release, and it says, Idaho Family Policy Center President Blaine Canzotti made the false claim in a web post and email sent to the organization's subscribers Monday. In the email, Canzotti writes that the Idaho Supreme Court stayed the implementation of the new law on April 8th because, quote, the Attorney General cut a deal with Planned Parenthood in which both parties agreed to let the court temporarily block the law in exchange for slowing down court proceedings. The claim is false, he says. Neither I nor any representative of my office made a deal with Planned Parenthood. Any suggestion to the contrary is false. The local media picks this up, right? Because most of the local media is not savvy enough to figure these things out. And the local media, this is the headline, Idaho Attorney General refutes false claim that he cut a deal with Planned Parenthood in the abortion lawsuit. Now, mind you, this is 1 month before the primary election. Idaho Attorney General Lawrence Wasden on Wednesday issued a news release to publicly refute a claim by Idaho Family Policy Center President Blaine Canzotti regarding Wasden's legal defense of the state's new abortion law, styled after a similar law in Texas. This is the order. What does the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court say? The parties having both requested action by this court to preserve the status quo, to give the parties the ability to adequately brief this case, the bill is stayed. The Supreme Court did not block implementation of the law on its own. It only blocked it because the AG, who's supposed to defend the law, asked them to. So the reason why our law is not in effect is because the Attorney General cut a deal with Planned Parenthood in which he asked the court to block the law. That's why our law is not in effect. And so I reached out to one of the journalists who I know who reported on this, and I'm like, come on, let's just look through the court record. The court record validates everything I said. Nothing was incorrect. So they issue a new article. This is the Capital Sun paper down in Boise. They issue a new article that summarizes the court record, and sure enough, I wasn't lying. Fortunately, because of the pressure that we put on the AG, now they literally shredded the joint defense agreement after I criticized him for making this deal. So I am banned from his office until he's no longer in office. And the pressure that we put on them was so much that they filed a motion with the state Supreme Court to lift the stay, to have the stay vacated so that the law could go into effect. And it's the funniest court order in the world. The state Supreme Court says, you guys just asked us to block the law. Now, why are you turning around a week and a half later and asking us to lift the stay, vacate the stay, right, so the law can go back into effect? And Planned Parenthood's motion was brief on that issue was hilarious because Planned Parenthood said the Attorney General cannot rewrite history. So that's where we stand right now with the heartbeat law. This law was supposed to go into effect on April 22nd. It was going to save 1,000 babies a year from abortion in the state of Idaho. And it is not in effect because our Republican Attorney General asked the state Supreme Court to block the law so that he could have more time to defend the law, so that he didn't have to defend it until after the primary took place and until after the Supreme Court Dobbs decision was ruled upon. It's where we stand. What we will come back and either fix this, or if our trigger law goes into effect, we have a trigger law in the books right now in the state of Idaho, that if Roe is entirely overturned, abortion would be banned with several pretty large exceptions. And if that law is the one that goes into effect, that would supersede our heartbeat law, and that would be great. And we'll work to tighten up those exceptions to make sure that we will eventually get to the point where every single baby in the state of Idaho is protected, regardless of the circumstances of their birth. And no attorney general can stand in the way of that. The second bill that we worked on was what we called the Vulnerable Child Protection Act. And the goal here was to protect children struggling with gender dysphoria from catastrophic and irreversible surgeries and hormone therapies. So just a few quick facts. Gender dysphoria is classified as a mental disorder by the APA, right? No one is transgender, truly. No one is transgender, right? People are gender confused. People suffer with real internal stress, right? Because they feel like they're in the wrong body, but they're not in the wrong body. They are objectively, biologically, down to every last cell, male or female. And it's our contention, and I think history will bear us out to be correct, that people who struggle with gender dysphoria, and it's a real struggle, I don't want to downplay that, should be treated with therapy. They should be treated with spiritual help, not with harmful hormone treatments or surgical removal of healthy body organs. And just of note, 2/3 of individuals struggling with gender dysphoria have other mental disorders. Why is that important? Because oftentimes it's those other mental disorders that are exacerbating the gender dysphoria, right? And when you treat the gender dysphoria by removing healthy body parts and you ignore the other mental problems that that poor person is suffering with, you don't actually solve the problem. Between 88 and 98%, this is a statistic from the APA, right? So the medical authority on this topic, quote unquote, between 88 and 98% of children struggling with gender dysphoria eventually accept their biological sex. There is no evidence that providing hormone therapies and reassignment surgery to minors reduces the likelihood of suicide in the long run. The suicide rate actually stays pretty constant for someone who undergoes what's called gender transition. So, this heckler's veto of, if you pass this bill, I'm going to commit suicide, right? And all my friends are going to commit suicide, and you're going to be responsible for our deaths. Well, actually, it doesn't improve your outcomes if you undergo these surgeries and these therapies. And of course, the reason why is because God created creation in a certain way. And, you can ignore that all you want, but that doesn't actually, it doesn't ultimately fix the problem. And then, by the way, Planned Parenthood is among the largest providers of gender-affirming care for minor children. In the state of Idaho, Planned Parenthood is the #1 provider of gender-affirming care for children. So the mechanics of this bill, material harmful to minors, Oh, that's wrong. It should be 675. The Mechanics of a Vulnerable Child Protection Act. It would amend the existing female genital mutilation ban. So in the state of Idaho, we have an FGM ban that prevents, this is a big problem with, especially with African Muslims, right, where they surgically remove portions of the woman's reproductive organs for religious reasons. So we have a ban on the books already in the state of Idaho that doesn't allow doctors to perform those procedures. So we would amend that ban, make it more expansive to include puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and sex reassignment surgeries, since in many ways, female genital mutilation is really similar to, castrating boys and removing girls' private parts. And I don't want to be too graphic, but like these things are similar, right? You're performing unnecessary medical procedures that cause people irreversible harm and mutilate their bodies. So this bill was sponsored by Senator Steve Vick from Dalton Gardens up here and Representative Bruce Skog from Nampa. And we passed with a veto-proof supermajority in the House, 55-13-2. Very excited. We are on our way to the Senate, where we've already been promised that we're going to have a committee hearing. And then the Idaho Medical Association steps in. And the Idaho Medical Association starts telling legislators that everything that's being done is evidence-based. Everything that's being done is for the health and the safety of the children. All of these things are reversible, by the way. None of these things are irreversible. They've been lying when they've been telling you that they're not. We have so many studies to prove how well these work. In fact, they have not one study, literally, not one peer-reviewed study. I've asked them to produce a peer-reviewed study. They can't produce one to show that health outcomes are improved for children when they undergo surgical transition or when they undergo cross-sex hormones, not one. And the Idaho Senate Republican leadership issues a statement in which we say that they are not going to allow this bill to come up for a committee hearing because it violates parental rights. And parents have a right to consent on behalf of their kids to these irreversible mutilating procedures. Idaho Senate kills bill on genetic confirmation surgery for minors. Now, other Republican states have found a way to deal with this issue, right? Arkansas was the first state that passed a bill banning puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones and surgeries for kids. And then Tennessee, just a couple months after that, passed a law that banned hormone therapies, cross-sex hormones, and puberty blockers for prepubescent kids. And then Texas, of course, said that they would investigate these transition procedures as child abuse and effectively put a clamp down on that. And then Alabama passed a law just a couple months ago that bans it and actually provides a 10-year prison sentence for any medical provider who provides this quote-unquote care. And then Arizona passed a law about a month ago that bans surgeries for kids. And then Florida kind of followed in Texas's footsteps and said, we're going to investigate that as child abuse as well. But in the state of Idaho, we can't do it. Well, we will, right? We'll come back next year and we'll get this done. Because this issue is not going to go away. Kids are being lied to. They're having their healthy body organs removed. It's becoming a bigger and bigger issue in the state. We had doctors come out and testify that the employers they work for are referring kids as young as girls, 15 years old, 16 years old, to get double mastectomies, right? To be castrated, right? This is an issue, and we will be ultimately victorious in it, I have no doubt. But the roadblock that we ran into this year with the Idaho Medical Association, I'll put it charitably, misleading the Idaho State Senate Republicans is an issue that we're going to have to overcome. And then finally, the third bill that we worked on and drafted this year was the bill dealing with public school and public libraries and the pornography, the obscenity that is available to children in those libraries. And So just a little bit of background. It's illegal for everyone else in the state to give a child essentially pornography. The legal term is obscenity, but because of how our state statute is written, because of how the Miller test applies to children, I mean, it includes most forms of pornography. It's illegal if you go to Barnes & Noble, if you go to 7-Eleven and you're a 15-year-old kid and you try to buy a porno mag. That's illegal in the state of Idaho. But there was an exemption created for public schools and libraries and museums that allows them to disseminate material harmful to minors. And we have ample evidence that in many public school and public libraries, that is going on, right? I mean, up here, one of the libraries that I went through their catalog was Post Falls, and they have tons of books on the shelves in the young adult section that is, I mean, like pictures of all sorts of sexual deviancies going on and encouraging it and championing and celebrating it, right? Now, the Supreme Court unanimously recognized in 2003 that states have a compelling interest in preventing children from accessing pornographic materials in libraries. So what our bill would have done is it would have struck the existing statutory exemption that allows the libraries and the schools and the museums to distribute this obscene material. And that was sponsored by Representative Gahan de Mordaunt. We don't have a Senate sponsor on here because we couldn't get a Senate sponsor. No one in the Senate was willing to step up to sponsor the bill. Passed out of the House, again with a veto-proof supermajority of 51-14-5. And then I realized that we were trying to get a committee hearing in the House. We had been promised a committee hearing. Again, we weren't able to get it scheduled. What the heck's going on? The Idaho Library Association had sent out an email to all of the libraries in the state, and it said, talking about the bill, that it removes the legal exemption protection in place protecting teachers, librarians, and museums from private legal action. If passed, this bill puts all of us at risk for being charged with a criminal act for disseminating material harmful to minors. Of course, this bill does not define harmful material, which leaves us at risk of being charged up to a year in jail or a $1,000 fine. So they're saying what makes this bill so dangerous is that we don't define what material is actually harmful to minors. They're lying. In the bill itself, we have a definition for material harmful to minors, and it follows what's called the Miller test as applied to children, and it basically says if the work does not possess any literary, scientific, artistic, or cultural value, and if, when considered as a whole, it has the predominant effect of sexually arousing children, and if it violates community standards for what sexual acts are normal and what's appropriate for children, then that book should be removed. So it's a pretty strict, actually, definition for what material is harmful to minors. But the ILA met with all the senators and convinced all the senators that the bill didn't include the definition that it clearly included. And this is an email from Senator Melissa Wintrow in which she basically repeats, she's a Democratic senator from Boise who led the charge against it and successfully killed the bill. She basically repeats the ILA's lies. This is really fascinating because this is kind of local for you guys. I'm going to skip through this quickly because I only have 10 minutes left. But this is somebody who works for the ILA, and they're writing to all of the librarians, and they say, we need to resist this unethical law. We will not adjust to the demands of this law if it's passed. We have, this destroys the foundations of democracy. Succumbing to an undemocratic, unethical law shouldn't be an option. And then the librarian for West Bonner Library responds and says, I agree, I will not censor, I will fight this until the end. Even if they pass this law, we're going to still keep offering porn to kids in libraries. So Republican leadership has a press conference with Democratic leadership in the state Senate. And Chuck Winder, who's the president of the state Senate, Republican out of Meridian, he tells the press that they are not going to hear this bill. They're not going to give it a committee hearing. And he says, I don't think you'll see some of the craziness that the House seems to like get very far in the Senate. Asked by reporters about House Bill 666, the bill to go after what backers call smut in Idaho libraries, Winder said, I do not see the chamber picking this one up. I don't see it getting a hearing committee. It's appropriately numbered 666. Ha ha ha. I think it's mischief and something that doesn't need to happen. We have a tendency to ask a lot of questions in the Senate. I think in this case, 666 is not likely to be heard. And then he went on and called the bill crazy. Removing porn from libraries or ensuring that children cannot access porn in their school libraries is crazy. So quickly we redrafted the bill. I don't need to get into that. And ultimately, the only recourse we had was to keep killing the library budget as a way to get back at them. And so we had a few good, strong House members do that repeatedly. And in fact, session went long this year because they kept killing the library budget. And ultimately, we ran out of runway. And so the best that we could do, the last bill that was passed this year was actually a House resolution, which I had to draft last second. And it basically says, porn in libraries is a problem. The state must find a way to address this problem in the future. Obviously, hardly a consolation prize considering what's going on. And then Chuck Winder, the president pro tem, in response to that said that they're going to put together a working group to investigate the issue. Now we are 3 months after, and that working group still has not been assembled and it has not met. And I don't think it will be assembled, and I don't think it will meet. So, again, just a shame that in Republican Idaho, we're running into these roadblocks. We will overcome them, right? We will overcome them. But people are constantly asking me, why do those bills not pass? And I just want to tell you guys, this is why, right? We have Republicans in our state legislature who stand in the way of basic common sense conservative reforms. So in a state like Idaho, I think the question is going to be, what does the future look like, right? What type of Idaho are we going to have? Right now, Idaho is in many ways one of the last bastions of freedom in the country. I'm hopeful though. I'm hopeful. And that's because, this last session aside and the big roadblocks we've run into, we've made a ton of progress in the last few years. We've made a ton of progress. The fairness in sports, defunding Planned Parenthood, other bills. A lot of those bills, legislators 10 years ago would have told you could never pass in the state of Idaho. I mean, I was being told they couldn't pass in the state of Idaho as we were lobbying for those bills 2 and 3 years ago. And so we're making progress. We're slowly persuading people, and we're running into temporary roadblocks. But we really need the church to wake up. We need Christians to get involved, and we need Christians to reclaim a vision for biblical activism by understanding and prioritizing the cultural mandate. And so I'm going to offer you 5 ways to get involved. And I think if Christians broadly throughout the state of Idaho did these 5 things, we would see tremendous cultural change in a short amount of time. So first, join a worshiping church that teaches a biblical worldview. And Jared Longshore yesterday kind of stole my thunder on this, which is great that we're mutually reinforcing each other. We are not going to win this fight without worship. Worship needs to be our highest priority, and that's because worship is one of the most potent weapons that God has given us for transforming and advancing his kingdom. Remember the Battle of Jericho? So the Battle of Jericho is one of those biblical stories that teaches us about the importance of worship as we engage in warfare. After 40 years in the wilderness, it was finally time for the Israelites to take possession of the Promised Land. And the first big showdown in the conquest of Canaan was at Jericho. Before the battle, God tells Joshua, who's leading the Israelites, something that sounds interesting to our modern ears, something that sounds weird to us, I'm sure. He says, don't take the city by force. The Israelites are not supposed to take the city by force. Instead, God instructs them to march around the city once per day for 6 days, worshiping the Lord. And then on the 7th day, they would march around the city 7 times. The priests would blow their trumpets and their horns, and the people would shout, and the walls would fall, and the city would be theirs. Sure enough, guess what happens, right? After 7 days of worship, Joshua commanded the people, shout, for the Lord has given you the city. And guess what? The Lord delivered the city into their hands. Their weapons were prayer and worship. And God used that to make a way and to give them victory. So if you're trying to do cultural engagement and political activism without having worship as a central part of all that you're doing it wrong. You're showing up to a gunfight without a gun. You're showing up to a knife fight without a knife. You're neutered. And we can't fulfill the cultural mandate without worship being at the center of our lives. So get in a church, become members, worship there. That's the key to victory in God's economy. Second, the Bible tells us to pray first of all for our civil leaders. Right? Paul in 1 Timothy says, therefore I exhort first of all that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings and all who are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and reverence. The Lord is the one who directs the hearts of kings, and the Lord uses our prayers to right the ship, right? To direct our public officials toward godly ends and godly goals. And so commit to praying for civil leaders regularly. Don't just get mad, right? Pray. Third, commit yourself to learning what the Bible says about contemporary cultural and political issues. We have all those books back there. There's several good introductions to the topics that have been covered during this biblical activism boot camp. Go and buy 1 or 2 books and commit yourself to reading them, right? Don't put it on your desk at home or on the bookshelf and let it garner dust. Commit yourself to learning these things so that you can stand for the truth in culture, so that you can teach the nations to obey all that Christ has commanded, right? In order for us as Christians to teach the nations, we must be informed. And fourth, participate. So we make it really easy for you guys to participate. Sign up for our email newsletter, and when things are going on or when we're in legislative session, we send out like 2, 3, 4 emails a week telling you this is what's happening with this bill. We need you to contact this legislator. We need you to contact your legislators. And we even make it easy for you to contact your legislators because we provide just this little form, and all you have to do is type in your name and your address, and it sends the letter automatically to your state legislator. And guess what? It makes a huge difference. So I'll give you 2 examples really quickly because I have 1 minute left. 2 examples. The first is fairness in sports. Governor Brad Little was going to veto fairness in sports. We mobilized 5,000 Idahoans to call his office. And I was told the reason why he signed fairness in sports was because those 5,000 Idahoans called his office. Second, the heartbeat law. I was talking with his director of, I was talking with someone in his administration the week after he signed the heartbeat law. He was going to veto the heartbeat law. We were able to mobilize almost 3,000 Idahoans to contact him. Planned Parenthood was able to mobilize 1,000 Idahoans to contact him, and he literally made the decision, I'm going to sign it because 2 or 3 times as many people told me to than told me not to sign it. So you contacting your public officials makes a huge difference, and we make it easy for you to do that. Sign up for our newsletter and do the action alerts. State legislators, oftentimes on most bills, might hear from 10, 20, 30 people. And for state legislators who aren't necessarily the most informed on these issues, don't really understand these issues, it's a part-time job, right? I have tons of sympathy for them. They will make decisions based on how many people contact them. And so if you can get 10 or 20 or 30 of your friends to contact a state legislator, oftentimes that's enough of a showing that they will change their position, or they'll vote for a bill, or they'll vote against a bill. So it really does, I'm telling you, I'm there all the time. It matters a ton for them. We're not talking about congressmen who hear from thousands of people every day, right? And never once consider what their constituents think. State legislators, your opinion matters to them. And then finally, register for our church liaison virtual training. So this is the last thing really quickly. This is a new program that we're launching. We actually launched it in beta form at the beginning of the last session. The church liaison program, our goal is to get 1 or 2 or 3 biblical activists in every church in the state. And they can keep their pastors abreast with what's going on. They can distribute voters' guides. They can distribute action alerts to the church. Most Christians don't know what's going on. Most pastors don't know what's going on. If we can just get one or two informed people in each church, they can change the culture of a church. And they can really, be of great service to that church and helping that church recognize what is needed in this cultural moment. So this is something that I would encourage you to register for. We have another training coming up in about a month. It's a 1-hour virtual training, and then you go and talk with your pastor and basically say, hey, to the pastor, hey, would you like it if I join this program? And hopefully your pastor says yes. And we've done it with a few churches down in the Treasure Valley this last year, and it's been really, really successful. So these are the 5 action items. These things seem really simple, right? And they're not quick solutions. And that's hard for a lot of people. Right? It's hard for a lot of people. What can I do right now in order to change everything right away? But guess what? In God's economy, that's not the way things work, right? The foundations have been destroyed progressively for over a century. How do we rebuild those foundations? It's going to take time, right? We're going to have to persuade people. We're going to have to learn these issues ourselves. We're going to have to get active. We're going to have to remind Christians of their biblical responsibilities to engage in the cultural mandate, to transform all of life, all of Christ for all of life, right? That will take time, but God will bless our faithfulness. And so my last story, and I realize I'm over time, but I'm going to take 2 more minutes, which means 4 minutes late. That's okay. So John Quincy Adams was obviously president of the United States, became a congressman after he was president, right? Son of John Adams, the founding father. And John Quincy Adams, as he was serving in Congress, took on the issue of slavery. That became his number one issue. He wanted to see the abolition of slavery. And so what he did, every single day, he would introduce a bill. Now, this was back before they had all the parliamentary tricks that they have now, where, if you introduced a bill, literally they had a box on the speaker's desk and you would put the bill into the box. It was called the hopper. And they'd have to go through the process, right, in order to either toss out the bill or to move it along through the process. You couldn't just ignore it, right, which is what Congress does today. So every single day, John Quincy Adams would put an abolition bill into the hopper. And this ticked off most of his fellow congressmen, and makes sense, right? Because they're wasting their time on this abolition stuff. John, you just can't get it done. Just knock it off. We'll deal with it later, right? And John Quincy Adams says, no, this is an issue of grave importance. We have to at least confront it. So John Quincy Adams is walking down those Capitol steps one day, and a reporter comes up and asks him and says, why are you wasting everyone's time with this? Why are you wasting everyone's time with this crusade that you're on, this anti-slavery crusade? And John Quincy Adams responds and he says, the duty is ours, the results are God's. And I think for the cultural moment that we're in right now, this is perhaps the best reminder that we need, right? Our job is to be faithful. And we know in Scripture that God blesses faithfulness. So be faithful. And our faithfulness will be used by God, by the Holy Spirit, to transform our culture, to transform our families, to transform every sphere of life that we are in. Just be faithful. Be like John Quincy Adams. Do your duty. Right? And I think if we do that, we'll see our nation transformed. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. And I hope that this has been edifying for you guys. I'm happy to talk with you after the event. And please connect with us. Sign up for our mailing list. Sign up for the Church Liaison program. And thank you and appreciate it.
All right, well, let me reiterate a huge thank you to our speakers. So thankful for them and for their contributions this weekend. Thankful for you all for coming. There are a couple other thank yous. Ben Grammer got our audio-visual stuff set up here, and it was quite a feat. So we're very thankful for Ben taking time to do that. And then Bruce and Susan Williams organized all the food and drinks and the events, and so very thankful for them. So if you could thank them, I would appreciate that. All right, with that, why don't we stand and I'll close us in prayer. Father, thank you for your grace and your mercy toward us. Thank you for the opportunity that we've had this weekend to learn and to grow, and pray that you would bless us as we go out now and cause us to grow in faithfulness and to grow in thankfulness for your mercies toward us, which are new every morning. Amen. All right. Thank you again for coming. And if you are a member of Trinity and you're able to help move chairs around and get set up for the Pentecost ball this evening, we would love your assistance.